Chapter 966. Outside Mount Saint Crossing. All the warriors shook their heads as they looked at the 17th floor that had not moved for a long time. It should be about time. Dugawubai will stop at the 17th floor. Who would believe that a 6-stage spiritual bridge of heaven and earth could reach the 17th floor? Yes, Dugawubai is really strong. If Wuxia did not reach the 18th floor, he might even be better than Wuxia. Although everyone thought that Yi Guqin would stop at the 17th floor. However, this kind of performance was already very shocking. Haha, enough. Beixian Elder and the others laughed heartily. In the entire Sword Dynasty, no one could break through to the 17th floor in the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth. Even Jian Jinghong could not do it. At this moment, even Suki Miyazaki, who had always been at odds with Mu Xingzu, completely shut her mouth. Yi Guqin's results were better than hers. Now no one had any doubts about Yi Guqin's strength. But at this moment, the 17th floor of Mount Saint Crossing suddenly released a dazzling golden light that illuminated all directions. Sluggish, dead silence, around Mount Saint Crossing, more than 400,000 warriors, all froze. The whole atmosphere was like ice. In the 18th floor of Mount Saint Crossing, Yi Guqin stepped in and looked around. It was a misty mountain range. What is the test of this level? Yi Guqin waited with rapt attention. Now he roughly knew some of the rules of Mount Saint Crossing. In the first 10 floors of Mount Saint Crossing, most of the tests were the basic strength of a warrior, various qualities, and so on. After the 10th floor, it was not only a test, but also one's temperament, perseverance, and so on. It could be said that from strength to temperament, if there was any weakness, Yi Guqin could not reach the 18th floor. Mount Saint Crossing was indeed a secret realm that tested the aptitude of a saint. Just as Yi Guqin was thinking about what this trial was about, a snow-robed figure suddenly appeared on the misty mountain peak ahead. Her figure was tall and slender. Her body was like limpid autumn water, and her bones were like jade. Her celestial appearance was peerless, and she was like a celestial maiden that had descended into the mortal world. She carried a chilly aura like a celestial being. When he saw this figure, even with Yi Guqin's calm personality, his sword hand couldn't help but tremble. His chest rose and fell as he exhaled deeply. His gaze was complicated as he softly muttered, "Situ Hongxue." Although he knew that the person in front of him was just an illusion, Yi Guqin still felt complicated. After all, he felt that he owed Situ Hongxue too much. Yi Guqin finally understood what this trial was about. It was an inner demon, or perhaps an obsession. For a martial artist's mental state to reach perfection, they had to get rid of all obsessions. However, Yi Guqin had many obsessions in his heart. When the Situ Hongxue opposite him saw Yi Guqin, her beautiful eyes flashed, and she immediately charged at him with her sword. Yi Guqin dodged and couldn't help but say, "Hongxue, I did let you down." "What Hongxue? I'm not Situ Hongxue, but Hongchen Shui." Situ Hongxue, no, she should be called Hongchen Shui, looked at Yi Guqin with indifference, as if she was looking at a stranger. Yi Guqin frowned slightly. The space of the 18th level should have been created based on his inner demons and obsessions. That meant, could it be? Yi Guqin thought of a possibility. Could Situ Hongxue have completely awakened the 7 despair demon heart? Could she have completely cultivated the way of the heartless? Could she have completely forgotten about him? After thinking about it, Yi Guqin felt that it was not impossible. Situ Hongxue might even forget her past, and become the heartless Hongchen Shui. Die! Hongchen Shui charged at him with her sword, leaving no room for negotiation. Yi Guqin, focus. Su Qingyu's warning sounded in his mind. Yi Guqin had passed the sacred mountain without relying on Su Qingyu's power. Now, sensing that Yi Guqin's emotions were slightly disturbed, Su Qingyu could not help but warn him. "Senior, don't worry. I'm not that weak," Yi Guqin said. After this, he would look for Situ Hongxue. If something really happened to Situ Hongxue, he would definitely not let the Immortal Valley go. "I'm sorry, Hongxue. I'll definitely find you." Yi Guqin brandished his sword and shattered Hongchen Shui's image. "Is it over?" Yi Guqin muttered to himself. However, there was still no change in the surrounding space. This proved that Yi Guqin had not passed this stage. Yi Guqin focused. At this moment, the scene in front of him suddenly changed. The mountain range that was originally covered in mist had turned into a huge volcano. At the mouth of the volcano, a golden longsword floated in the flames. From time to time, the heart-wrenching cries of a young girl could be heard. That's... Hearing this voice, Yiguchen's body trembled. He could not be more familiar with this voice. Su Jianshi. Next to the mouth of the volcano stood a noble man who looked like a celestial being. He had long golden hair, silver eyes, and a perfect temperament. He was born a god. Di Haotian. Yiguchen exhaled deeply. He was not surprised at all. Di Haotian was indeed Yiguchen's obsession. Di Haotian said indifferently, "He Su Jianshi, if I can completely refine you, I can obtain the human sovereign sword. When the heavenly sovereign and human sovereign become one, who in the South Horizon region can do anything to me?" Wha? Yiguchen. Why didn't he save me? Why did he let me suffer this hellish torture? Su Jianshi's figure flickered in and out of the human sovereign sword. She was surrounded by endless flames. It was like a fiery hell that made one wish they were dead. Humph. Before Yiguchen could do anything, Su Qingyu's cold snort echoed in his mind. Although this was an illusion, Su Jianshi was still Su Qingyu's daughter. How could he not have any reaction? "Senior, don't worry. I, Yiguchen, swear that I will save Su Jianshi and kill Di Haotian. If I violate this oath, I will fall into the depths of hell. If I violate this oath, I will fall into the depths of hell." What kind of determination was this? One had to know that the person Yiguchen swore to kill wasn't some random person. He swore to kill Di Haotian, the true dragon of Haotian. In the South Horizon region, Yiguchen was the only one who dared to swear to kill Di Haotian. The moment Yiguchen made the vow, the entire space started to tremble. Di Haotian, Su Jianshi, and the other illusory figures all collapsed. He passed the 18th floor. Outside, when the light of the 18th floor lit up, there was no longer any uproar. There was only a deathly stillness that seemed to have been frozen for eternity. Even Wuxia remained silent, and didn't say a single word. Yiguchen had passed the 18th floor. He was on par with Wuxia and Jian Jinghong. He was second only to the mysterious number 1 genius on the sword ranking, Z, who had passed the 19th floor. In the sky, the 4 swordsmen were also silent. Especially Jian Shi, who had always looked down on Yiguchen. His face under the mask froze. Even among the famous 13 swordsmen of the Sword Dynasty, there were only a handful who could pass the 18th floor. At least, Jian Shi couldn't pass the 18th floor. As for the 19th floor, only the number 1 on the sword ranking, Z, had passed it. Only 2 of the 13 swordsmen, Jianan Kuei and Jian Shisan, had passed it. In other words, only 3 geniuses in the entire Sword Dynasty had passed the 19th floor. The 20th floor was like a forbidden area. No one had passed it. At this moment, everyone looked at each other with faint anticipation and excitement in their eyes. Could Yiguchen pass the 19th level of Mount Saint Crossing and be on par with the other 3 top geniuses? Chapter 967. The 19th level of Mount Saint Crossing was a seemingly empty space. Yiguchen stepped into it and looked around. What is the test of the 19th level? Yiguchen murmured. Even Jian Jinghong and Wuxia could not pass the 19th level. The difficulty of this level was definitely not that simple. Just as Yiguchen was thinking, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. It was a figure in a black robe that looked exactly like him. This kind of test again. Looking at the figure who had the same face as him, Yiguchen could not help but curl his lips into a faint smile. He understood what the test of the 19th level was. What was a martial artist's greatest enemy? It was himself. The test of the 19th level was a battle with himself. If that's the case, then come. Yiguchen held the 9-Dragon Thunder Prison sword in his hand, and did not hesitate at all. It was not the first time he had experienced this kind of test. However, it was obvious that this test would be more difficult than the previous ones, because the Yiguchen in front of him was almost equivalent to Yiguchen himself. Physical body cultivation method, martial skills means, even his battle instincts and thoughts were exactly the same as Yiguchen's. As a result, no matter what means Yiguchen used, he could not cause any real harm to his other self. On the outskirts of Mount St. Crossing, everyone's gazes were tightly focused on the 19th floor. The people of Sacred Cliff College were even more nervous. Although logic told them that Yi Guchen should not be able to pass the 19th level. However, they still had a glimmer of hope in their hearts. They hoped that Yi Guchen could pass the 19th level and make Sacred Cliff College famous. After all, Sacred Cliff College had been silent for too long. They needed someone to stand up and lead Sacred Cliff College back to the top. 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours. There was no movement on the 19th level of Mount St. Crossing. As time passed, the hearts of the people from Sacred Cliff College sank. It should be over soon. The test of the 19th level is a battle with oneself. As time passes, one's own strength will be suppressed more and more. However, the other clone will not be affected at all. On the Hua family's side, Hua Wuxia said in a calm voice. He passed the 18th level, but failed to pass the 19th level. However, he was naturally aware of the test on the 19th floor. The moment these words were spoken, everyone's eyes were filled with shock. How is this possible? That's right. How could one possibly win when fighting against an identical version of oneself? Not to mention that one's own strength will be suppressed as time passes. Hua Wuxia's words were undoubtedly a message to everyone. The more time passed, the less likely it was that Yi Guchen would be able to clear the 19th level. Although Yi Guchen had already won the bet, the Hua family still didn't want Yi Guchen to pass level 19. It seems like there's no hope. Hearing Hua Wuxia's words, the disciples of Sacred Cliff College shook their heads and sighed. For hours had passed. Yi Guchen's strength must have been greatly suppressed. Under such circumstances, how could the other god of war be at his peak state? Inside the 19th level, the vibrating waves of sword chi swept in all directions. Yi Guchen was engaged in a bloody battle with his other self, using all his means. At this moment, Yi Guchen was covered in wounds from head to toe. Blood was also flowing from the corner of his mouth. On the other hand, although the other side was in a similar state, it was clearly in a better state. My strength has been suppressed by 30%. Yi Guchen's eyes were solemn. He could feel that the longer this dragged on, the greater the suppression he would suffer. At first it was only 10%, then 20%, and now 30%. It was conceivable that if Yi Guchen continued to drag on, his strength might be suppressed by 40 or 50% in the end. At that time, it would be almost impossible to defeat his clone. What should I do? Yi Guchen pondered in his heart. The clone opposite him made another move. The sword wings on his back extended. 10,000 God tribulation, destruction of heaven and earth. Yi Guchen's sword stance changed. He also used 10,000 God tribulation, destruction of heaven and earth. Boom. The sound of a violent collision filled the entire space. Amidst the buzzing sound, Yi Guchen's figure retreated rapidly, coughing up another mouthful of blood. Although it was the same move, the power that Yi Guchen displayed at this moment was 30% weaker than his clones. No wonder Jian Jinghong and Hua Wuxiu couldn't pass this level. This level is indeed not simple. Yi Guchen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand. He was thinking of a way to break out of this situation. In the continuous battle, Yi Guchen knew that this clone was almost exactly the same as him. There were no flaws at all. It was obvious that ordinary means could not pose a threat to the clone. What should I do? Yi Guchen's expression was solemn. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. The next moment, Yi Guchen's eyes suddenly burst out with a divine light. I know, I see. Yi Guchen's lips curled into a smile. A surge of sword chi surged out from his body. Yi Guchen suddenly understood a principle. Although this clone was the same as him in all aspects. But there was one thing that the clone absolutely did not have. Soul. This clone did not have a soul. This did not seem to be a big deal because it did not affect the clone's combat power. However, Yi Guchen had managed to master one move. And that move was something that the clone would never be able to perform. A martial artist's greatest enemy is himself. And there is only one way to break through himself. And that is to break the shackles of happiness. If the heart is fearless, the sword is invincible. Even if it's me, it can't stop my footsteps. Yi Guchen smiled, his black hair dancing in the wind. He raised his hand, and the 108,000 heaven-ripping sword souls in his body surged out. At the same time, the clone on the opposite side also surged out 108,000 sword souls. Seeing this, Yi Guchen revealed a sneer on his face. He used his fingers as a sword, and the sword pointed to the sky. A terrifying sword concept accompanied by a transparent soul power vibrated out. This move was a move that Yi Guchen could only practice after his sea of consciousness recovered. At this moment, he finally used it. Solitary. 9. Swords. Heart sword style. Yi Guchen raised his hand, used his fingers as a sword, and pointed straight to the sky. 108,000 sword souls, with Yi Guchen as the center, spiraled into a formation. Heart sword style, using the heart to control the sword. Where the heart goes, the sword goes. Almost at the moment Yi Guchen's mind rose, the 108,000 sword souls, as if breaking through the void, directly surrounded the clone. And the clone could not perform the heart sword style at all. To perform the heart sword style, not only did it require soul power, but it also required a real soul. Although the clone had a sea of consciousness and soul power, it did not have a real soul. Therefore, when Yi Guchen used this move, the outcome of the battle was already decided. Controlling 108,000 swords with the heart, sweeping through the 9 heavens. Break for me. Yi Guchen pointed at the clone, and the 108,000 sword souls gathered in the void, turning into a giant soul sword, and slashed at the clone. There was a loud bang. The clone shattered into countless light spots. The 19th level broken through. Chapter 968. Outside Mount St. Crossing, the atmosphere was silent. It's already been 6 hours. Some people said. So he still can't create a miracle? Some disciples of Sacred Cliff College shook their heads in pity. That's more than enough. Little friend Dugu, you've exceeded my expectations. Elder Beixian wasn't disappointed, and he smiled with narrowed eyes. Yi Guchen's performance had shocked everyone present. Even if he did not pass the 19th floor, it would not affect Yi Guchen's reputation at all. At most, it would appear a little incomplete. Well, his performance is very good. Danxia Hallmaster and the others also had smiles on their faces. Yi Guchen could be said to have brought great reputation to Sacred Cliff College today. I still underestimated this boy. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Sword Technique Hall Master Luofeng's expression was a little complicated as he sighed slightly. He finally knew where Yi Guchen's confidence came from. For such a person, even if it was a false saint as a teacher, it was enough. It was normal for him to look down on a knight like him. Master is really amazing. Mu Xingzu's eyes were full of admiration as usual. Jiang Fingyan and Shangguan Jingshan both looked a little solemn. Especially Shangguan Jingshan. When he arrived, he was so arrogant that he even looked down on Yi Guchen. But now, Yi Guchen's performance had completely shut Shangguan Jingshan up. Next to him, Shangguan Yan's mouth also never closed. This boy is really pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. Shangguan Yan pursed her lips and muttered. Back then, during the 5 academies selection, she knew that Yi Guchen was somewhat extraordinary, but she did not expect Yi Guchen to hide it so well. Just when everyone thought that Yi Guchen was about to be transmitted out, the 19th level of Mount St. Crossing suddenly lit up with an extremely dazzling golden radiance. That radiance illuminated the 9 heavens and 10 earths, and the entire world seemed to be dyed with a layer of sacred golden light. When this light appeared, everyone's faces froze. That's right, it was completely solidified. Be it the geniuses or the lords of the exalted realm, their gazes all froze. Even Hua Yuntao, Wu Hongyan and other false saint experts were stunned for a moment. An unexpected scene appeared at this moment. On the other side of Sacred Cliff College, Beixian Elder slapped Jiang Yan hard. Jiang Yan covered his swollen face and glared at Beixian Elder. Elder, why did you hit me? Let me see if I'm dreaming. Beixian Elder was stunned for a moment. Then his eyes were filled with joy. Elder, you. Jiang Yan wanted to cry, but he had no tears. But more than that, he was still shocked by Yi Guchen's passing of the 19th level. The 19th level? How is it possible? How did he pass it? Hua Wuxia took a deep breath. Although he tried to keep a calm face, his frown showed that he was not calm at this moment. Even he could not pass the 19th level, but Yi Guchen did. How could this be? Hua Yuntao's face was extremely gloomy. As for Ling Moyin and the others, they could not say a word at all. Today, Yi Guchen had brought too much shock to everyone. However, after the 19th level lit up, a thought involuntarily rose in everyone's heart. Was it possible for Yi Guchen to pass the 20th level? If Yi Guchen could really pass the 20th level, he would create a record in the Sword Dynasty. He would also receive the title of Supreme, which no one had ever received before. A natural saint. These 4 words meant that Yi Guchen was destined to become a saint if he did not fall in the future. It could be said that the title of a natural saint was not inferior to a 10th grade supreme genius. Master Xingzhu believes in you. Mu Xingzhu was extremely emotional. The hearts of everyone in Sacred Cliff College also tightened. They knew very well what a natural saint represented. If Yi Guchen could really become a natural saint, then Sacred Cliff College would do its best to nurture him. This meant that in the future, a saint would very likely appear in the Sword Dynasty. Is it really possible to become a natural saint? In the sky, Jianxi's voice trembled slightly. This was because the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing was a forbidden area that even the likes of Jian Kuei, Jian Shisan, and Purple could not pass. Could Yi Guchen pass it? Brother Dugu is the best at bringing about miracles, Kempo said with a smile. Look at Mount Saint Crossing. At this moment, some martial artists suddenly exclaimed. This was because they suddenly saw that at the top of Mount Saint Crossing, there was a sudden surge of light, and then a light screen was formed in the midst of the light. The scene shown on the light screen was a lone mountain cliff. On the mountain peak, a figure stood alone. It was Yi Guchen. It's Dugu Wubai. We can see the scene on the 20th level. Exclamations could be heard. They did not expect that they would be able to see the scene on the last level in real time. Everyone's hearts were in a knot at this moment. Even Yi Guchen's opponents were watching carefully. This was the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. No one had ever been able to pass the 20th level. On the 20th level, Yi Guchen, who was standing on the lone mountain cliff, looked around and suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. This lone mountain was very similar to the Mount Saint Crossing in his previous life. In his previous life, the sword demon Dugu Wubai defeated all the sword experts in the world on the Mount Saint Crossing with a withered branch. And in this life, Yi Guchen had passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. Who would his opponent be? No cultivation at all. Feeling his strength being suppressed to the extreme, Yi Guchen shook his head slightly. On the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing, he could barely use any means. Because whether it was his physical body, qi, or soul, they were all suppressed to the extreme. It could be said that Yi Guchen was no different from a mortal now. And his opponent on this level. Yi Guchen suddenly raised his head and looked at the dark clouds in the sky. Traces of lightning were rolling in the dark clouds. Yi Guchen understood. On this level, his opponent was not a puppet, a monster, or a clone. His opponent. It was the sky. Rumble. The sound of rolling thunder came from the horizon. Then, a bolt of lightning as thick as an arm suddenly struck down from the dark clouds and rushed toward Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen could not use any means at the moment, so he could only use his physical body to resist the power of the lightning tribulation. Puchi. As expected, Yi Guchen was directly sent flying, his shoulder bleeding. He took a deep breath and continued to stand. Another bolt of lightning struck without any pause. Outside, everyone who saw this scene sucked in a breath of cold air. Why didn't Dugu Wubai resist? Resist what? I suspect that his strength has been suppressed to the extreme, and he can't use any means at all. Is the test of the 20th level to resist the power of the heavenly tribulation with a mortal body? In a moment, Yi Guchen was already bleeding all over. His skin and flesh were lacerated, and the wounds were so deep that his bones could be seen. No. Mu Xingzhu's eyes were red and tears fell. This scene was simply too tragic. Not to mention that Yi Guchen had a mortal body. Even if he used all his strength, he would definitely not be able to resist the power of the heavenly tribulation. The test of the final level of Mount Saint Crossing was to restore the situation of the heavenly tribulation sage. And Yi Guchen had to resist the power of the heavenly tribulation with his physical body. Chapter 969. Why were heavenly tribulation saints called heavenly tribulation saints? Because saints were existences that had survived heavenly tribulation. What was heavenly tribulation? Heavenly tribulation was a shackle that restricted martial artists. Only by breaking through this shackle could one transcend mortality and become a saint. And in the entire South Horizon region, how many people could truly survive heavenly tribulation and become a saint? Although there were not many false saints in the South Horizon region, there were definitely not few either. As for saints, even in the Sword Dynasty, where there were many talents and experts, there was not a single one. Even the Sword Alliance Master, proud divine prefecture, who had transcended mortality and unparalleled battle power, had tried his best to become a saint. He had even gone to the most dangerous skyless sword realm of the 4 great mystery realms. One could imagine how difficult it was to become a saint. And even false saints found it so difficult to survive heavenly tribulation. Not to mention Yi Guchen, who had no cultivation at all. Although the simulated heavenly tribulation in Mount Saint Crossing could not be compared to the real heavenly tribulation. But what was Yi Guchen's cultivation now? Plus, his strength was suppressed to the extreme. In everyone's eyes, the possibility of Yi Guchen passing the 20th level was almost zero. Whoosh! Another bolt of lightning struck down and hit Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's figure retreated. His body was dripping with blood and his skin was charred black. There was not a single piece of unharmed flesh. It's futile. No one can pass the 20th level. Wuxia shook his head slightly. This child is indeed amazing. But this level, sigh. Great Elder Ime also sighed. Even in his eyes, Yi Guchen had no hope of passing this level. No wonder no one has ever passed this level. How can a human resist the heavens? Jianxi also shook his head. This final trial of Mount Saint Crossing was indeed a bit too much. Is it really so? Kimpo muttered to himself. He thought of the time when Yi Guchen faced the almost undefeatable Di Haotian in the heavenly wasteland plains, borrowing a sword from the heavens to shatter Di Haotian's invincible legend. Yi Guchen was a man who could change the fate of the universe by himself. That was why Kimpo deeply trusted Yi Guchen. He was even confident that Yi Guchen would be able to compete for the position of Jiankui. Brother Yi, can you still bring about a miracle today? Kimpo thought to himself. Everyone stared at the light screen nervously. Ling Mayin, Han Lingxian, Mu Xingzu, Kong Kong and Xuanlian. Even Qin Paisai, Zhuoqiuqing, and other familiar faces were so nervous that their palms were sweating. If Yi Guchen could really pass the 20th level, then he would forever be recorded in the annals of the Sword Dynasty. Rumble. Lightning continued to fall on the 20th floor. And as time passed, the power of the lightning grew stronger. At this moment, Yi Guchen was extremely weak. His entire body was charred black, and the corners of his mouth and chin were covered in blood. There were no tricks in this level. The only way was to face the tribulation head-on. The pain of being struck by lightning was more torturous than the 18 levels of hell. Even with Yi Guchen's temperament, cold sweat still appeared on his forehead, mixed with blood, and dripped down from his chin. Impossible. You can't succeed. You can't succeed. Endless demonic voices began to surround Yi Guchen's ears. It seemed to be telling Yi Guchen that there was no way he could face the tribulation and pass the 20th level. In my dictionary, there is no such thing as impossible. Yi Guchen's eyes were incomparably resolute. He gritted his teeth and coughed up blood, but he still pressed forward. His attitude seemed to have angered the tribulation. In the rolling dark clouds in the sky, terrifying balls of lightning were brewing as if they were accumulating power. Oh no, Dugu Wubai is in danger. At the periphery of Mount Saint Crossing, everyone saw this scene from the light screen. After accumulating power, a terrifying beam of lightning, like a dragon, pierced through the clouds and directly drowned Yi Guchen's figure. No. Mu Xingzu, Han Lingxian, and the others were extremely pale. Yi Guchen's figure was shattered bit by bit in the endless lightning. Is he dead? The hundreds of thousands of warriors present were silent. This stunning sword genius, sword demon Dugu Wubai, who was like a comet streaking across the sky, had fallen just like that? Great! Ouyang Tianji, Huaxingjie, In Wufeng, Yushuangyan, and the other enemies were all overjoyed. However, Hua Wuxia's face did not have the slightest trace of a smile. The 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing is a special space. It can be said to be the manifestation of one's will and soul. Therefore, Brother Dugu will not die, Kempo said calmly. When these words were heard, the joy on the faces of Yi Guchen's enemies instantly froze. However, although he will not die, the pain of his body being shattered is very real. Moreover, if his will is not strong enough, his soul will also be severely damaged, and he may even become an idiot, Hua Wuxia said. Hearing this, Mu Xingzu and the others, who had just been relieved, became anxious again. Sure enough, inside the screen of light, Chu Feng and the others were all shocked. After the lightning dissipated, Yi Guchen's figure reappeared. However, at this moment, Yi Guchen's face was so pale that it was somewhat frightening. Even with his willpower, he still had such an expression. It was obvious that he was suffering from the pain of his body being shattered. I heard from Little 13 that the pain of being destroyed by the heavenly tribulation is 10,000 times more painful than death by 1,000 cuts. Can this Dugu Wubai withstand it? Jian Wu's tone was slightly worried. If possible, he also hoped that the itinerant cultivator camp could produce another prodigy of the sword Dao. That way, they would have a better chance of competing for the position of Jiankui. It's not that simple. Even Little 13 could not withstand it. This Dugu Wubai, it will be difficult. Jianxi shook his head. Her tone now no longer held any contempt for Yi Guchen. However, she still believed that Yi Guchen was not as good as Jian Shisan. Master. Mu Xingzu's heart ached as she watched. Although Yi Guchen's life was not in danger, there was a possibility that his soul would be severely damaged. Moreover, the pain was 10,000 times more painful than death by 1,000 cuts. No matter how strong one's willpower was, it would be difficult to withstand. Rumble. The test was still ongoing. The heavenly tribulation descended once again, drowning Yi Guchen. Twice, thrice, thrice, over and over again. Yi Guchen's body was shattered and reformed again. The pain of death by 1,000 cuts was enough to drive even the most strong-willed martial artist crazy. The spectators outside Mount Saint Crossing felt their teeth turn cold, and their backs turn cold just by looking at that tragic scene. That was not something a human could withstand. Leave. You won't be able to break through. An emotionless voice came from the void. Cough. Yi Guchen's face was extremely pale. He spat out a mouthful of blood and his lips were bloodless. What can a mere heavenly tribulation do to me? Yi Guchen's body was ramrod straight as he looked coldly at the sky. Rumble. The heavenly tribulation seemed to be enraged by Yi Guchen's words. Amidst the rolling dark clouds, endless lightning gathered. Finally, before everyone's eyes, it formed a human face made of lightning. That thunderous face covered the entire sky. It was like an ancient thunder god, punishing on behalf of the heavens. How can a mortal body resist the heavens? The thunderous face spoke. Its voice was like thunder, spreading for thousands of miles. No existence seemed to be able to resist this heavenly might. Yi Guchen raised his head. His black hair fluttered in the wind, like an unyielding sword. If you can't resist the heavens, how can you be called invincible? Chapter 970. How could a mortal defy the heavens? If you can't defy the heavens, how could you be invincible? In the face of that mighty heavenly might, Yi Guchen didn't cower in the slightest. Instead, he went tit for tat, proud and unyielding. Hearing this, most of the people outside Mount Saint Crossing fell silent. If you can't defy the heavens, how could you be invincible? Good job, Dugu Wubai. Grand Elder Ime laughed heroically, his laughter shaking heaven and earth. He was very happy that Sacred Cliff College had produced such an outstanding disciple. Senior Brother Dugu is strong, Sacred Cliff College is strong. All of the Divine Cliff Academy's disciples had excited expressions, their eyes red. At this moment, Yi Guchen's back view was infinitely elevated in their hearts. All the questions and doubts from before had vanished into thin air. From the hallmaster to the disciples of Sacred Cliff College, everyone was praying for Yi Guchen. Dugu Wubai. Ling Maoyin laughed bitterly. When she thought of her previous attitude towards Yi Guqin, she felt extremely embarrassed. She was too ashamed to show her face. Who was the one who really embarrassed Sacred Cliff College? Was it Yi Guqin, who was defying the heavenly might by himself? No. It was Ling Moyin herself. But even so, Ling Moyin still prayed in her heart that Yi Guqin could succeed. Because at this moment, whether Yi Guqin succeeded or not was not only related to himself. It was also related to Sacred Cliff College, which had been silent for a long time. Maybe you can create a miracle that I can't. Ling Emoshu muttered to himself as he drank. At this moment, many Sacred Cliff College disciples were cheering for Yi Guqin. Even the lords were the same. They originally thought that Yi Guqin was just talking nonsense. But now, who would still think that Yi Guqin was arrogant and ignorant? Who was the truly ignorant one? The Purple Smoke Territorial Lord and the Yellow Dragon Territorial Lord were already pale. The last trace of revenge in their hearts was completely extinguished. At the very least, they could no longer threaten Yi Guqin by themselves. In the 20th level, the thunderous human face seemed to have been completely enraged by Yi Guqin. It opened its huge mouth, as if it had transformed into a black hole. Endless lightning flickered faintly in his mouth. It was obvious that the next moment would be the moment when the heavenly tribulation unleashed its full power. Yi Guqin's body was once again destroyed. This pain was thousands of times more intense than before. Perhaps it could really destroy Yi Guqin's will. Next is the most crucial moment. On the outside, Kempo was sweating profusely. Everyone from the 5 great academies. There were people from the various aristocratic families, many elders and hundreds of lords. Even Wu Hongyan, Hua Yuntao, and other false saints were paying attention to the light screen. Everyone vaguely knew in their hearts. This might be the final test of the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. If Yi Guqin could endure it, he would create an unprecedented record. Rumble. Dark clouds rolled in the sky. Billions of lightning bolts shot out of the thunderous human face's mouth. The lightning covered the sky, as if hundreds of thunder dragons were roaring and tearing apart thousands of miles of the sky. This heavenly tribulation was like the end of the world. Even the light screen outside of Mount Saint Crossing began to tremble violently, and became very unstable. Before this apocalyptic lightning tide, Yi Guqin's isolated figure seemed so small. Haha, come. My sword is invincible. How can I be defeated? I, Duguwubai, have nothing to fear. Yi Guqin laughed heroically. His black hair fluttered as he stepped into the sky. Not only did he not retreat, but he also faced the heavenly tribulation head-on. At this critical moment, the space of the entire 20th level suddenly violently churned and shook. Yi Guqin's figure was faintly distorted. Then, the golden light screen outside of Mount Saint Crossing actually shattered with a loud bang, and all images disappeared. What's going on? More than 400,000 martial artists were so nervous that they almost forgot to breathe. In the end, the light screen shattered and disappeared. They actually could not see what happened next. How can this be? Mu Xingzu, Han Lingxian, and the others were anxious. At this time, they could not see Yi Guqin's situation. It was really worrying. Either the heavenly tribulation's power is too strong, or... Kenpo thought, his eyes flashing. But no matter what, the people outside of Mount Saint Crossing could only wait silently for the result. In the 20th level, Yi Guqin's figure was submerged in the lightning tide. His body was twisted, and the extreme pain almost made his will collapse. That kind of pain could not be avoided no matter how strong one's will was. Yi Guqin, your situation is very bad. Although this place will not kill you, it will be very serious if your soul is injured. Su Qingyu's voice sounded. At this moment, Yi Guqin's situation was very bad. I can help you through it with Saint's will, Su Qingyu continued. Although he was only left with his primordial spirit, he had survived the heavenly tribulation and had Saint's will. Su Qingyu could help Yi Guqin if he helped. But in this way, Yi Guqin would be considered cheating. No need, Senior Su, I can still hold on. Yi Guqin's body was covered in blood as he gritted his teeth. Yi Guqin was not a pedantic person. If it were other things, Yi Guqin might have chosen the simplest and most direct method. But Yi Guqin wanted to rely on his own will to break through Mount Saint Crossing. This was the sword demon's obsession. Ah! The pain was like thousands of ants gnawing at his heart, and Yi Guchen could not help but cry out. His eyes were blood-red as he looked up at the endless lightning tide surging in the sky. His eyes were full of unyielding will. Who could bend the spine of the sword demon? Not even the heavens. Boom! Accompanied by a loud explosion, Yi Guchen's entire body was shattered again. The moment Yi Guchen's body was shattered, outside Mount Saint Crossing, the entire Mount Saint Crossing suddenly released a red glow. That red, as bright as blood, filled the entire Mount Saint Crossing. It was as if the entire mountain was dyed in the color of blood. Everyone knew what this light represented. Yi Guchen was about to fail. Is it still not possible? Even Great Elder Ime let out a long sigh. He really hoped that he could see Yi Guchen completely break through the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. The many disciples of Sacred Cliff College also fell silent, as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over their heads. They were slightly disappointed. Duguwubai, you are already outstanding enough, Ling Mayin said as she clasped her hands. What can't defy the heavens? What is undefeated? It sounds nice, but he still failed to break through. Ouyang Tianji, Hua Xingjie, and the others took the opportunity to sneer. How can the heavens be defied so easily? Even us false saint experts have to respect it. Duguwubai is really biting off more than he can chew. He is too arrogant, Hua Yintao commented calmly. Hearing Hua Yintao's words, the faces of the Sacred Cliff College people turned red. Yi Guchen could break through the 19th level. Was that considered arrogant? My master hasn't come out yet. He still has a chance. Mu Xingzu muttered with a determined expression. Jiang Fengmian, Shangguan Jingshan, and the others were all shocked. Did Mu Xingzu still have hope for Yi Guchen? Junior sister Mu, you are really confident in your master, Suki Miyazaki couldn't help but say. She was speechless before, but now she could finally refute. Mu Xingzu clenched her fists tightly, and her beautiful eyes were filled with determination. At the same time, on the 20th level, the endless waves of lightning had completely shattered Yi Guchen's body. Su Qingyu's primordial spirit appeared in the void and looked at this scene, sighing slightly. Just as Su Qingyu also thought that Yi Guchen was about to fail and be teleported out. The space where the endless lightning flashed suddenly began to distort. A figure suddenly reappeared. The figure appeared and disappeared in the lightning, and only a vague shadow could be seen. However, Su Qingyu's expression suddenly froze for a moment. Who is he? Chapter 971. That figure flickered in and out of the endless lightning bolts. There was a sense of vicissitudes of life, and a sense of loneliness that seemed to have reached the pinnacle. It was the loneliness of not being able to find an opponent. Who is it? As a saint, Su Qingyu had encountered all kinds of things, but this was the first time he had seen something like this. Even he could not see the exact appearance of the figure in the lightning bolts. It felt like Yi Guchen, but there was something different about it. Yi Guchen had a calm temperament that did not belong to his age. But in Su Qingyu's eyes, he was still just a junior. At this moment, the figure that flickered in and out of the lightning bolts made Su Qingyu feel like he was facing an expert of the same generation. It was definitely not a temperament that a teenager could have. Yi Guchen, how many more secrets do you have? Su Qingyu could not help but sigh. At this moment, a middle-aged man in a black robe stood in the endless lightning bolts. The man's face was upright and handsome, and his facial features were chiseled by knives and axes. A pair of bottomless black eyes carried a sense of vicissitudes of life. Am I back? The aloof man slowly raised his hand and muttered to himself. This man was Yi Guchen, or in other words, the sword demon, Duguwubai. The test of the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing was to face the heavenly tribulation with one's spiritual will. That was why Yi Guchen was able to reform his body even if it was shattered. At this moment, the body that was reformed was not Yi Guchen in his teenage form. It was the soul that truly belonged to the sword demon, Duguwubai. It's been a long time. Duguwubai looked coldly at the sky. At this moment, he had his hands behind his back. Although he did not move, the surrounding lightning bolts could not get close to his body. It was as if Duguwubai was surrounded by endless sword energy protecting him. Invincible Dugu strode across the void, taking one step at a time towards the heavens. The thunderous human face that filled the sky roared angrily again, and even more terrifying lightning bolts burst out. It was as if the entire sky had turned into a net of lightning, trying to trap Dugu Wubai within it and kill him. Heart Control 108,000 swords, sweeping through the 9 heavens, heart sword style. Dugu Wubai raised his left hand and unleashed 108,000 sword souls, which transformed into a destructive tide of swords that swept across the 9 heavens. My sword breaks the universe for 30,000 miles. I stand alone on the path of the sword. I am the pinnacle. Breaking sword style. Dugu Wubai raised his right hand, and a terrifying sword chi pierced through the heavens and earth. He used the union of man and sword, and his entire person seemed to have turned into a sword that could destroy the heavens. Heart sword in his left hand, broken sword in his right hand. At this moment, the heart sword style and the broken sword style of Dugu's 9 swords were simultaneously displayed by Dugu Wubai. Rumble. The extremely terrifying sword chi seemed to have torn apart the thunder tide. Even the apocalyptic heavenly tribulation could not stop sword demon Dugu Wubai's footsteps. This was the true sword demon. This was the true Dugu Wubai. This was the peerless talent of an invincible swordsman in the Jianghu. Boom. Dugu Wubai turned into a sword and charged towards the thunderous human face. No. How could you? The thunderous human face suddenly roared, and there was even a hint of trembling in its voice. The situation before its eyes did not make sense at all. However, it did not know that Dugu Wubai was a soul that had transmigrated. Dugu Wubai's spiritual will was so strong that it made the heavenly tribulation tremble in fear. After being lonely for a lifetime, it's not bad to take the heavens as my opponent. Dugu Wubai put his hands behind his back and casually stepped into the black hole of the thunderous human face. The endless lightning around him was completely shattered. The power of the heavenly tribulation actually began to retreat. Even the thunderous human face wanted to hide. However, the corners of Dugu Wubai's lips curled into a faint smile. Since you've already appeared, leave something behind. After Dugu Wubai finished speaking, he once again released his spiritual will, and the sword chi swept in all directions. All kinds of heavenly tribulation, upon my body. Dugu Wubai opened his hands, and the endless power of the heavenly tribulation around him poured into his body. And in Yi Guchen's real body, the thunder tribulation sword that had been dormant suddenly woke up at this moment, and began to crazily absorb the power of the heavenly tribulation. Yi Guchen's thunder sword intent was also comprehending at an extremely terrifying speed. At the same time, the 9 thunder flood dragon souls in the 9 dragon thunder prison were also nourished and crazily absorbed the energy. Yi Guchen's strength in all aspects was increasing. The low-grade emperor-level sword technique he cultivated, the divine sword lightning controlling art, was originally a thunder attribute sword technique. At this moment, there was almost no obstruction at all, and he directly comprehended it to the perfection stage. After all, Yi Guchen was currently experiencing the feeling of transcending the heavenly tribulation. This was a huge test, but it was also a rare opportunity. No, you're looking down on the heavenly tribulation. In the void, the thunderous face's angry roar reverberated. I, Dugu Wubai's real opponent, have always been myself. What is the heavenly tribulation? Dugu Wubai absorbed the endless power of the heavenly tribulation, and finally, the thunderous face completely collapsed. At the moment of collapse, Dugu Wubai's lips also curled into a faint smile. The sword demon will finally appear completely. After saying that, the middle-aged man's figure of Dugu Wubai gradually dissipated. In his place, Yi Guchen's youthful appearance appeared. Yi Guchen slowly opened his eyes, and the vicissitudes of life flashed in his eyes, and then completely disappeared. In an instant, the dark clouds in the sky completely lit up. Not far away, seeing Yi Guchen's figure reappear, Su Qingyu's heart slightly calmed. He took a deep look at Yi Guchen. In fact, Su Qingyu was also curious and doubtful. Who was the figure that appeared and disappeared in the thunder tide just now? Was it Yi Guchen? But Su Qingyu wisely did not ask anything. After all, everyone had their own secrets. I've gained so much this time. Yi Guchen let out a long sigh of relief. If he did not have the soul of the sword demon, he might not have been able to pass the 20th level. Yi Guchen also finally understood why the 20th level was a forbidden place. It was indeed not a place that ordinary prodigies could pass. Even Di Haoyan would not be able to pass it. But danger and opportunity coexisted. Yi Guchen's gains made himself speechless. He had directly comprehended the godly sword lightning-wielding technique to the transformative realm, and could use the ultimate move. He had also comprehended the thunderous sword essence to the peak, and was only a little away from transforming it into the thunderous sword principle. The thunderous sword essence was a peerless sword essence. Even with Yi Guchen's monstrous talent, it would take a lot of time to comprehend it to the peak. But now it was done in one go. The 9-Dragon Thunder Prison had been baptized by the heavenly tribulation, and stored a lot of thunderous power. The 9 Thunder Flood Dragon souls had absorbed enough power, and there were faint signs of transformation, and the power of the sword was also stronger. It was not impossible for Yi Guchen to repair it. In addition, the most important thing was the Thunder Tribulation sword in Yi Guchen's body. Once again, words appeared on the blade of the sword. It was the cultivation method of the 4th style of the 10,000 God Tribulation. Chapter 972. The Supreme Sword Technique, 1000 God Tribulation, could be said to be Yi Guchen's true trump card. It was also the only technique apart from the 9 Tribulations Heart Sutra that Yi Guchen had obtained from the Sword of Thunder Tribulation. And the 4th style that was manifested was called Heaven's End. Heaven and earth will be destroyed, all life will fall, Buddha will cry, Heaven's End. Yi Guchen was secretly shocked after roughly skimming through the words that recorded Heaven's End. In order to display Heaven's End, Yi Guchen had to cultivate to the divine dwelling stage at the very least. And even if he was at the divine dwelling stage, he could only barely display a few % of the power of Heaven's End. But Yi Guchen was not discouraged. Given his current cultivation speed, the divine dwelling stage was not far away. Finally, it's over. The dark clouds on the entire 20th floor dispersed, replaced by a bright universe. Yi Guchen stood alone in the void, sighing with emotion. The 20th floor of Mount Saint Crossing only simulated a trace of the heavenly tribulation. It couldn't be compared to the real heavenly tribulation. Yi Guchen finally understood why there were so many false saint experts. And saints of the heavenly tribulation were extremely rare. The heavenly tribulation was indeed not something that could be easily passed. The heavenly tribulation simulated in Mount Saint Crossing does have the power of a real heavenly tribulation, but it's still far from it. But this is also an extremely rare experience, and will be of great help to you when you pass through a real heavenly tribulation in the future. Su Qingyu smiled. As a saint expert who had passed through a heavenly tribulation, Su Qingyu naturally had the most right to speak. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. There was no fear in Yi Guchen's eyes, only anticipation. And just when Yi Guchen thought he was about to be sent out, golden splendor suddenly rippled out from the void in the sky. Among the golden splendor, there seemed to be countless mosquito-like ancient golden characters that recorded the truth of heaven and earth and the rules of the great Tao. What is this? Yi Guchen's eyes widened in surprise. Those ancient golden characters fell from the sky and directly fused into Yi Guchen's body. Yi Guchen did not feel uncomfortable at all. Instead, he felt extremely comfortable. For a moment, his 5 senses sharpened and his mind became clear, as if a dusty mirror had been wiped clean. This is... Even Su Qingyu's eyes were filled with surprise. For a saint like him to reveal such an expression, it was clear that he was surprised. Senior Su, what is this? Yi Guchen was puzzled. Yi Guchen, you've really gained a lot this time. Su Qingyu sighed. Senior, please speak clearly, Yi Guchen said. This is the law of the holy path. Su Qingyu said. Saint Tao laws. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. He had occasionally heard of Saint Tao laws, but he was not very clear about them. The reason why saints are saints is because they can control the power of laws, Su Qingyu said. Is this a power that only saints can control? Yi Guchen was shocked. He did not expect that passing the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing would give him such a reward. Compared to comprehending the lightning sword intent, this Saint Tao Law enlightenment was a great fortuitous encounter that made one's eyes turn red with envy. Although the divine path precepts cannot directly increase your combat strength, they will play a vital role in your future heavenly tribulation. The power of the precepts is too useful for heavenly tribulation, Su Qingyu said solemnly. Now that Yi Guqin had received the Saint Tao laws, it meant that he could feel the power of laws in advance. This would be of great help to Yi Guqin in his future heavenly tribulation, and even in comprehending his own power of laws. The Saint Tao laws were too precious. Yi Guqin exhaled deeply with a faint smile on his face. The opportunity on Mount Saint Crossing is too great. No wonder you can pass the 20th level. You can be called a natural saint. Yi Guqin finally understood the meaning of being a natural saint. To be able to pass through the 20th level, one must be a stunning genius. Furthermore, with the Saint Tao Law enlightenment, Yi Futian could not help but wonder. With the addition of the Saint Tao laws, there was a great possibility that one could become a saint. But you have to be careful. The Saint Tao laws are an absolutely fatal temptation to false saints, Su Qingyu said in a serious tone. Yi Guqin's expression turned serious when he heard this. The reason why false saints could not pass heavenly tribulation was that they were stuck at the level of comprehending laws. Yi Guqin had received the Saint Tao laws, so he was naturally in high demand for false saints. It was conceivable that if some false saints with bad natures knew that Yi Guqin had the Saint Tao laws, they would definitely put aside their dignity to deal with Yi Guqin. Although the Saint Tao laws have been integrated into your body, it is inevitable that others will be jealous. Perhaps there will be crazy people who want to extract the laws from your body, Su Qingyu warned. It seems that the Saint Tao laws are a great opportunity, but also a big trouble, Yi Guqin said with a faint smile. I can help you conceal the fluctuations of the laws, but you still have to be careful, Su Qingyu said. With a wave of his hand, the power of the primordial spirit spread out. Although Su Qingyu's primordial spirit had not recovered, it could still conceal the fluctuations of the Saint Tao laws. Then the strange fluctuations of the laws in Yi Guqin's body were completely restrained. Thank you, Senior. Yi Guqin cupped his hands slightly. As Yi Guqin obtained the Saint Tao laws, his challenge was completely over. Outside Mount Saint Crossing, everyone was still nervously watching. The entire Mount Saint Crossing exuded a blood-red glow, making the people of Sacred Cliff College extremely nervous. However, the following scene caused the entire world to fall silent. In practically an instant, the crimson radiance turned golden. The entire Mount Saint Crossing was dyed with golden light, like a golden mountain. Countless golden petals fell from the void. At the foot of Mount Saint Crossing, golden lotuses bloomed. Flowers rained from the sky and golden lotuses sprouted from the ground. It was the scene of a saint. What's going on? All the onlookers were dumbfounded. Just now, they thought that Yi Guqin was about to fail and would be teleported out. However, in an instant, the situation was reversed, and golden light overflowed. There were even strange phenomena like flowers raining from the sky and golden lotuses sprouted from the ground. Flowers raining from the sky and golden lotuses sprouted from the ground. This is the scene of a saint. Rumor has it that the true dragon of Haotian Di Haotian has such a phenomenon. That's why he's considered to have the bearing of a saint. Could it be that Dugu Wubai? Many martial artists' expressions froze as they looked at each other. For words appeared in their minds at the same time. A natural saint. There was only one explanation for Mount Saint Crossing to be able to produce such a phenomenon. Yi Guqin had passed the 20th level and become a natural saint. Thinking of this, the hundreds of thousands of martial artists present were petrified, and their eyes were filled with extreme shock and disbelief. Even Jian Kuei, Jian Shisan and Purple, who was first on the sword roll, could not pass the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. It was known as a forbidden area for martial artists. How could Yi Guqin, a sixth-stage heaven and earth spirit bridge prodigy, pass it? Moreover, everyone saw on the light screen that Yi Guqin's figure was drowned by the heavenly tribulation, and there was almost no possibility of him passing it. How was it possible that he could break through all of a sudden? Chapter 973. No. I don't believe it. I absolutely don't believe it. Ouyang Tianji's eyes were bloodshot, unwilling to believe it at all. It had not been easy for him to break through to the divine dwelling stage, but he had only passed the 9th level. Yi Guchen, a 6th level heaven-earth spirit bridge cultivator. How could he pass the 20th level? He roared, unwilling to believe everything in front of him. Let alone him. Even Ouyang Fingyun's eyes were filled with shock. If the truth was not in front of him, he would never believe it. The 20th level, is it possible? On the Hua family's side, Hua Wuxia let out a deep breath. He had broken through the 18th level of Saint Crossing Mountain. It could be said that his glory was unparalleled. If there were no accidents, Hua Wuxia's fame would soar to another level. But at the moment, Saint Crossing Mountain was filled with flowers and golden lotuses. In comparison, Hua Wuxia's result of the 18th level seemed insignificant. At this moment, Yi Guchen's opponents were all extremely nervous. Everyone was waiting for a result. They were waiting for Yi Guchen to come out of Saint Crossing Mountain. While everyone was anxiously waiting, the space at the top of Saint Crossing Mountain distorted. A figure walked out with his hands clasped behind his back. He was dressed in a black robe that was not tainted by a speck of dust. His face was calm and relaxed, unlike Hua Wuxia, Ouyang Fengyan, and the others who had broken through the mountain. It was Yi Guchen. At this moment, Yi Guchen not only did not look the slightest bit embarrassed, but his spirit was clear and his eyes were bright like stars. He seemed to be in a better state than before. This scene made the hundreds of thousands of cultivators speechless. They even had the illusion that Yi Guchen had gone in for a leisurely stroll, and then came out. At this moment, Yi Guchen's figure was straight as a ramrod as he stood on the top of Saint Crossing Mountain. The surrounding flowers and golden lotuses made Yi Guchen look like a natural saint king, majestic and imposing. All eyes were on him. Countless gazes were fixed on Yi Guchen like iron meeting a magnet. Although the abnormality of Mount Saint Crossing had more or less indicated the result. But everyone still wanted to hear Yi Guchen's confirmation with their own ears. What was the result? Little friend Dugu, what's the result? Even with great Elder Ime's calm personality, he could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva at this moment. He looked at Yi Guchen with anticipation. Sacred Cliff College had been quiet for too long. They desperately needed a leader of the younger generation to lead Sacred Cliff College to greatness. Fortunately, I did not disappoint you. Yi Guchen cupped his hands and smiled. As soon as these words were spoken, the entire Mount Saint Crossing fell into a deathly silence that was suffocating. Countless people's eyes widened, and their bodies trembled slightly. Yi Guchen had succeeded. He had passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing, which was known as a forbidden area. He had done something that Jian Kuei, Jian Shisan, and even the number 1 on the sword leaderboard, Zi, had never done. He had completely passed Mount Saint Crossing, and become a natural saint. Whoosh! After a short moment of silence, there was an uproar that could shatter the heavens. Countless sounds of shock and exclamations surged in all directions like a tide breaking a dam. Today, they had witnessed a miracle that belonged to Mount Saint Crossing, Sacred Cliff College, and the Sword Dynasty. Senior brother Dugu is mighty. All the Sacred Cliff College disciples went crazy. Their eyes were scarlet, and their voices were hoarse. Sacred Cliff College had been suppressed by Tensei College and other major colleges for far too long. Even Holy Emblem disciple Ling Emoshu had been defeated by Hua Wuxia. It could be said that all the Sacred Cliff College disciples were extremely sullen. In the Sword Dynasty, Sacred Cliff College's disciples were inferior to the other colleges. But today their Sacred Cliff College's genius, Yi Guchen, was destined to shake the entire Sword Dynasty. Even in the Nantian region he would have a place. After all, what did it mean for Yi Guchen to pass Mount Saint Crossing? It meant that if Yi Guchen didn't fall in the future, he was destined to become a saint. Yi Guchen was a natural saint. Xingzhu has always believed in Master. Mu Xingzhu was so excited that tears welled up in her eyes. Her master was indeed her master. No matter where he was, no matter how he hid his identity, his brilliance would never be buried. He really succeeded. Ling Moyin's delicate body trembled, and her heart was filled with mixed feelings. She was excited about Yi Guchen's success, but she also felt ashamed of her previous attitude. Dugu Bai, here's to you. Ling Emoshu smiled faintly. After his cultivation was crippled, Ling Emoshu's face never smiled again. But at this moment he smiled. He was happy for Yi Guchen and Sacred Cliff College from the bottom of his heart. Han Lingxian, Kong Kong, Xuanlian, and the others were also happy for Yi Guchen. As for Jiang Yan, his face was as pale as a sheet of paper, without a trace of blood. Now are all of you still doubting Brother Duga's ability? Saber 9 let out a long laugh from the horizon. Jian Wu and the seventh swordsman were silent. Even Jian Shi, who had some doubts about Yi Guchen before, was speechless at this moment. What else could they say? Yi Guchen's performance had surpassed Jian Shisan's. Jiang Fengmian and Shangguan Jingshan's expressions froze at this moment. Jiang Fengmian had a complicated look in his eyes. He shook his head and sighed. Xingzhu, your master is really extraordinary. Shangguan Jingshan's face was no longer as arrogant as before. After all, no one had the right to be arrogant in front of a natural-born saint. Cousin, did Dugu Wu Bai really make it through? Shangguan Yan's eyes widened in disbelief. It should be. Mount Saint Crossing is a special arcane realm. No one can take advantage of it, Shangguan Jingshan said in a low voice. Some of Yi Guchen's enemies could do nothing about it even if they did not want to believe it. Mount Saint Crossing would not be faked. If there were other ways to pass it, then there would be people who could reach the top after so many years. Therefore, even if the Hua family did not want to admit it, they could not say that Yi Guchen cheated at this moment. Hua Yuntao's face was extremely cold. Dark clouds gathered in between his eyebrows and he did not say a word. He did not expect this at all. Not only did the bet not go as he wished, but it also made Yi Guchen's reputation. This is impossible. I must be dreaming. As for Hua Xingjia, Hua Tengfei in Wufeng, Yu Shuangyan and the others, their faces were ashen at this moment. He was a natural-born saint. In the entire Sword Dynasty, only Yi Guchen had received this title at this moment. Now, they faced Yi Guchen with more fear than hatred. Over at Tianxian College, even Wu Hongyan's delicate and beautiful face was in a state of shock. She also did not expect Yi Guchen to have such a result. As for Suki Miyazaki, who hated Yi Guchen, she was completely speechless at this moment. She could not say anything else to belittle him. What a joke. Did she have the right to look down on a natural-born saint? Even Jian Jinghong, who she admired, did not have the right to do so. Haha, I heard someone say that if Dugu succeeds in the end, you will twist your heads off and let me kick them like a ball. Qin Jun laughed heartily. Although the Purple Smoke Lord and the Yellow Dragon Lord were venerables, they were dumbfounded at this moment. Their eyes were blank. They were terrified at this moment. With Yi Guchen's identity as a natural-born saint, Sacred Cliff College would definitely do its best to cultivate and protect him. It could be said that Yi Guchen held grudges. With one word he could make the Purple Smoke Lord and the Yellow Dragon Lord miserable. Now the two lords no longer had their previous disdain. Their eyes were full of fear. Chapter 974. At this moment, Yi Guchen's enemies were all ashen, as if they had lost their parents. Yi Guchen had created the impossible. He had broken through 20 levels of the Saint Ascension Bridge, at the 6th stage of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. No one in the Sword Dynasty could do that. The result of the bet has been decided. Hua Yintao, shouldn't you fulfill your promise? Yi Guchen stood alone at the top of Mount Saint Ascension, with his hands behind his back, looking indifferent. At this moment, his temperament was not much weaker than Hua Yintao's. Of course, it was just the spirit of an expert. Yi Guchen's real cultivation was not comparable to Hua Yintao's. Hearing Yi Guchen's words, the hundreds of thousands of warriors around were speechless. Yi Guchen was probably the only person who dared to call a false saint expert by his name without the slightest respect. However, Yi Guchen did not care. He was not a rude person, but it was relative. At the selection of the 5 academies, Hua Yintao relied on his false saint cultivation, and was very powerful. If Wu Hongyan had not intervened, he would have been forcibly admitted to Tensei College. Yi Guchen did not need to be polite to such a person. Good, the younger generation will surpass us in time. Hua Yintao was so angry that he laughed. Even with his false saint state of mind, he still had such an expression, which showed how angry he was. Hua Yuntao was a false saint expert of the Hua family, and the first elder of Tensei College. Such an identity could be said to be one of the top existences in the Sword Dynasty. However, now he had been slapped in the face by a junior and lost the bet. Hua Yuntao's mood could be imagined. TSK, the newborn calf is not afraid of the tiger. How dare he talk to a false saint expert with such an attitude? Sigh, he is a natural saint. So what if he is a natural saint? He will be a saint if he can grow up. If he can't, he will still be a dead man. Whispers could be heard around Mount Saint Crossing. Most of them were shocked and impressed by Yi Guchen's performance. However, there were still a small number of warriors and geniuses who felt a little jealous. Some people just couldn't bear to see others doing well. It was natural that people would be jealous of someone who was born a saint. Hua Yuntao's expression turned cold. Yi Guchen's disdain for his dignity made his killing intent surge. However, no matter how angry Hua Yuntao was, he could not attack Yi Guchen in front of more than 400,000 martial artists. Not to mention Wu Hongyan, Grand Elder Ime and the others. It's just a bone-molding saint pill, Hua Yuntao said with a cold face. With a flick of his finger, the jade bottle containing the bone-molding saint pill flew out. A bone-sculpting saint pill was indeed nothing to Hua Yuntao. He cared more about his face. Yi Guchen received the jade bottle. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with it, he stored it into his origin ring. Thank you. Although Hua Yuntao was disgusting, he still fulfilled his promise. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. He had finally obtained one of the three main materials to refine his doppelganger. Only the soul source crystal and the longevity wood core were left. When the three materials were gathered, Yi Guchen could use the half-pure demon body in the God Devourer sword to refine his doppelganger. At that time, he could try to use the God Devourer sword. Yi Guchen's trip to Mount Saint Crossing this time could be said to be a successful one. The gains were too great. Not to mention the other gains, just the Saint Path Law empowerment was a priceless opportunity that could not be measured by any price. Even false saints would be envious of the Saint Path Law empowerment. Just as Yi Guchen was about to return to Sacred Cliff College's ship, Hua Yuntao spoke again. Dugu Wubai, I'll give you another chance to join Tensei College. You're a natural saint, and the college will do its best to cultivate you. Sacred Cliff College can't compare to Tensei College's resources. In the face of this solicitation, all the warriors around looked at Yi Guchen. Now that Sacred Cliff College was declining, Tensei College's resources were indeed much better than Sacred Cliff College's. When the people of Sacred Cliff College heard this, their hearts tightened. Ling Moyin in particular bit her lip. They were afraid that Yi Guchen would abandon Sacred Cliff College. Yi Guchen heard this and said indifferently, now that things have come to this, there's no need to say such things. During the selection of the 5 academies, Yi Guchen had almost fallen out with the Hua family and Tensei College. There was no need for this at all. Looking at Yi Guchen's attitude, the people of Sacred Cliff College were relieved. Is that so? Hua Yuntao narrowed his old eyes slightly, and then said, my Hua family has some records. Rumor has it that if one passes through the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing, there will be a special great opportunity, which is suspected to be related to a saint. When Hua Yuntao's words fell, the noisy atmosphere of Mount Saint Crossing froze in an instant. All the noise was silenced. All eyes fell on Yi Guchen in unison. That gaze seemed to be able to pierce through him. Any opportunity, as long as it was related to a saint, was no small matter. Feeling the countless burning gazes around him, Yi Guchen's expression did not change, but his mind was slightly focused. He did not expect the Hua family to have such information. However, it was obvious that the Hua family's records were very vague, and Hua Yuntao did not know about the Saint Path Law enlightenment. Otherwise, if he knew, Hua Yuntao would have made a big move long ago. After all, the Saint Path Law was too tempting for a false saint. I passed through the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing and did not encounter any abnormalities. Yi Guchen shook his head slightly. He naturally could not tell them about the Saint Path Law enlightenment. If this matter was leaked, trouble would ensue. Yi Guchen believed that with Hua Yuntao's character as a false saint, he would do anything in order to become a saint. Hearing Yi Guchen's words, many warriors around were also skeptical. Firstly, they had not heard of such records. Secondly, when Yi Guchen appeared, there was no special aura on him. Hua Yuntao's expression was uncertain. In fact, he was not sure. There were vague records in the Hua family's library, but it did not say what it was or whether it existed. After all, Yi Guchen was the first to reach the 20th level, and there was no other precedent. However, Hua Yuntao obviously would not let it go. He continued, "Do you think you don't have it just because you say so? Hand over your origin ring and search it. Perhaps the Hua family has a soul-searching formation that can also search for abnormalities in your body." These words made Yi Guchen's expression suddenly turn cold. Hua Yuntao actually wanted him to hand over his origin ring, and even search his soul. "Elder Hua, you've gone too far." Great Elder Imei stood up and said. Since Yi Guchen had chosen Sacred Cliff College, Great Elder Imei naturally had to stand up for Yi Guchen. "I'm just making a small suggestion. I didn't say that I wanted to harm him. Don't tell me I don't even have the face to do that." Hua Yuntao simply threw caution to the wind. Yi Guchen was born to be a sage. No matter what, Hua Yuntao was not willing to let him go. If Yi Guchen was allowed to grow up in Sacred Cliff College, who knew what accidents would happen in the future, and whether it would affect the Hua family and other false sage families? "Old man Hua, you've really gone too far." Wu Hongyan also took a step forward. Hua Yuntao's old face stiffened when a false sage expert stepped in to help Yi Guchen. However, at this moment, in the distant void, 4 auras erupted at the same time. Every aura was not weaker than Wu Hongyan's or Hua Yuntao's. 4 false sages had appeared at the same time. Chapter 975. In the distant sky, 4 figures appeared from the void at the same time. Previously, they had been observing in the dark, but they did not show themselves. It was not until Yi Guchen passed the 20th floor that the 4 false saint experts were surprised. But now, when Hua Yuntao pointed out that passing the 20th floor might be related to the opportunity of becoming a saint, the 4 finally showed up. "That's the head of the Shangguan family, Shangguan Bo." Someone saw a middle-aged man in a purple python robe among the 4, and could not help but say, "And the head elder of the Yin family, Yin Lingshan." Some people looked at a black-robed elder with a gloomy face, and felt a chill in their hearts. The head elder of the Ouyang family, Ouyang Su. Among the 4, a golden-robed elder with his hands in his sleeves squinted slightly, and the deputy head of the Jiang family, Jiang Wu. Some people looked at a red-robed man who looked strong and powerful among the 4. Apart from the Hua family, the other 4 false saint families of the Sword Dynasty had all sent experts. "Ha! You're finally willing to show up." Hua Yuntao sneered. On the other side, Wu Hongyan's charming face froze slightly, and her expression was slightly solemn. Head Elder Imei's expression was extremely solemn. Those who came did not come with good intentions, and those with good intentions did not come. The 4 false saint experts chose to show up at this moment naturally had their reasons. Strictly speaking, these 4 experts were all from the aristocratic family camp, and were completely different from the rogue cultivator camp. There are geniuses in every generation. To think that our Sword Dynasty could produce such a genius. Congratulations. The head of the Shangguan family, Shangguan Bo, who was wearing a purple python robe, smiled faintly, but his smile was cold. "Indeed, it's a pity that such a talent is in Sacred Cliff College." Yin Lingshan shook his head. "The 4 of you, what do you mean by this?" Head Elder Imei asked in a low voice. "Imei, you can't say anything here." The head elder of the Ouyang family, Ouyang Su, narrowed his eyes. They were all false saint experts, and head elder Imei was a 9th-tier venerable. Wu Hongyan raised her head and said, "So why are you here? Are you ganging up on a junior?" She was also a false saint of the itinerant cultivator camp. Naturally, she did not get along well with the false saints of the aristocratic families. "Dean Wu, you're wrong. We're just curious as to what kind of fortuitous encounter this kid obtained on the 20th floor, said Jiang Wu, the vice head of the Jiang clan. "I've already said before that I didn't obtain anything. The 20th floor is just a checkpoint." Facing the questioning of the 5 false saint experts, Yi Guchen was calm. Yi Guchen's heart was calmer at times like this. Even if Mt. Tai collapsed in front of him, his expression would not change. If he revealed even the slightest abnormality, the 5 experts would be able to easily grasp the clues. At that time, if the Saint Dao laws were exposed, Yi Guchen would be in great trouble and danger. Looking at Yi Guchen's expressionless face, Jiang Wu, Ouyang Su, and the other false saint experts who appeared later all had a trace of suspicion in their eyes. In fact, they didn't know what kind of fortuitous encounters awaited on the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. They weren't even sure if there were any. It was just that the sage fortuitous encounter was too important for them. Even if there was only a slight chance, they wouldn't want to miss it. In that case, hand over your origin ring and search it. Then go to the Hua family and enter the God-searching formation for inspection. Hua Yuntao said coldly. Whether Yi Guchen obtained the sage fortuitous encounter or not, Hua Yuntao would not let it go. He couldn't let a natural saint grow up safely and threaten the safety of the Hua family. I can do that, but why should I? Yi Guchen stood with his hands behind his back, his black hair fluttering in the wind. He faced the 5 false saints coldly without the slightest cowardice. Tisk as expected of the sword demon Duguwu Bai. Yi Guchen's character was admired by many martial artists. Humph, contradicting a false saint. You won't even know how you died. Ouyang Tianji and the others sneered disdainfully. So what if he was a natural saint? As long as he hadn't grown up, it was all empty talk. Because I'm a false saint. Hua Yuntao's aura was released, surging like a vast ocean. Although a false saint expert had the word false, it was related to the word saint after all. No one could ignore the power and majesty of a false saint. Yi Guchen felt a sense of oppression like an ancient mountain pressing down on him, making him groan in his chest. But his spine was still straight, and he didn't flinch at all. Enough, old man Hua. You've come back alive. Wu Hongyan waved her hand. At this moment, Ouyang Su and the other false saints stepped out at the same time. Dean Wu, we're not trying to make things difficult for this guy. What's wrong with a little inspection? The innocent will be cleared, Sheng Guanbo said with a faint smile. Dugu Wubai is a disciple of Sacred Cliff College. Great Elder Yimei and the 5 temple masters stepped forward bravely. However, they were facing Hua Yuntao and the other false saints. The realm of a venerable was still a little weak, and they didn't have enough confidence. Looking at the 2 sides confronting each other, the martial artists around Mount Saint Crossing moved a little further away, and the lords of the various places also clearly divided into 2 camps, the independent cultivators and the aristocratic cultivators. But overall, there were obviously more lords recruited by the aristocratic cultivators than the independent cultivators. Between heaven and earth, there was a strong smell of gunpowder. Just as the atmosphere was tense, an old voice with a hint of coldness spread out. Ah, why would a disciple of Sacred Cliff College need to be manipulated by you? Hearing this voice, Hua Yuntao and the other false saints all frowned. Yi Guchen felt a slight sense of familiarity, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. In the distance, a limping old man with white hair and beard, holding a walking stick, stepped on the clouds and came over. His white beard fluttered in the wind, and he looked like an immortal with an extraordinary temperament. It was the old man who Yi Guchen had occasionally asked for wine in the Inn of Thunder City. Heavens, that's the Dean of Divine Cliff College, Qin. Seeing the limping old man arrive, some martial artists couldn't help but exclaim. The Dean of Divine Cliff College, Qin, was a famous false saint expert of the Sword Dynasty. His strength was one of the best even among the false saints. So that's how it is. Yi Guchen murmured. Although he had guessed that the old man who knew his true identity was probably a little extraordinary, but he didn't expect it to be the mysterious Dean of Sacred Cliff College, Qin. And this Qin, how did he know Yi Guchen's identity? After thinking about it, Yi Guchen felt that he might have been exposed to some big shots. However, since Qin didn't reveal his identity, it proved that, at least for now, Qin didn't have any malicious intentions towards Yi Guchen. Master Jian, even a mysterious old man like you is here. Hua Yuntao's face was slightly unnatural. Master Jian, you're here too. The reason was because he had been defeated by Confuzi. As false saints, it might be difficult to determine life and death, but it was too easy to determine victory and defeat. If I didn't come, would I just watch my disciples be humiliated? Confuzi glanced at Hua Yuntao and the other four. Ouyang Su, Sheng Guanbo, and the other false saints also had a slightly solemn expression. But fortunately, they had 5 false saints on their side, so they weren't too afraid of Confuzi. Confuzi, I can forgive this boy's rudeness, but he must be tested. Hua Yuntao refused to budge. The other 4 false saints were also a little curious about whether Yi Guqin had obtained any opportunities. Moreover, since Yi Guqin had completely joined Sacred Cliff College, he was an enemy of the aristocratic families. Ouyang Su and the others also didn't want to watch this natural saint grow up safely. With all these reasons added together, the 5 false saints were unwilling to let Yi Guqin go. What if I refuse? Confuzi said lightly, leaning on his walking stick. Wu Hongyan also quietly stood beside Confuzi. Then, I'll offend you. The 5 false saints burst out their auras at the same time, like 5 volcanoes erupting. A great battle was about to break out. Chapter 976. On one side was Hua Yuntao, and the other false saint experts from the 5 aristocratic families. On the other side was Confuzi, Wu Hongyan, and a group of Sacred Cliff College temple masters and elders. The thick smell of gunpowder permeated the surroundings, as if a single spark was enough to ignite the entire situation. Is the civil war about to begin? Many warriors hurriedly retreated into the distance for fear of being implicated. Some Sword Dynasty warriors were also worried. If a civil war between false saints broke out on Mount Saint Crossing, the consequences and impact would be immeasurable. The Sword Dynasty was already in danger due to internal and external troubles. If such a thing happened, it would definitely cause a great turmoil. In the sky, Kempo and the other 4 sword sons also retreated into the distance. There was no room for them to intervene in such a great battle. If the Alliance Master was still here, these false saint aristocratic families wouldn't be so arrogant, Jianxi said coldly. I didn't expect such a conflict to occur. Kempo was also very worried. No one expected that Yi Guqin alone would cause such an extreme conflict. Even Yi Guqin himself was frowning. To be honest, he didn't want such a conflict to occur. Yi Guqin still wanted to develop in the Sword Dynasty peacefully. If the Sword Dynasty itself was shaken due to internal strife, it would undoubtedly affect Yi Guqin's cultivation and growth. You've gone too far. Confuzi shook the void with his walking stick. In an instant, a terrifying transparent sword energy soared into the sky and swept out, causing the void to tremble endlessly. Wu Hongyan also waved one hand, and true energy surged out, shaking the void. Although false saint experts could not tear the void at will like real heavenly tribulation saints, they could still affect the space and cause great vibration and destruction. In addition, the 5 temple masters of Sacred Cliff College, First Elder Ime, and the others also attacked at the same time. Although their attacks weren't as powerful as those of false saints, it was still a force to be reckoned with. On the other side, Hua Yuntao and the other 4 pseudo-saints all looked cold and attacked at the same time. The 5 false saints attacked at the same time. Even if they did not use their full strength, the power was enough to make hundreds of thousands of warriors in the distance shudder. Rumble. Above the vault of heaven, 2 huge torrents of energy burst forth, and were about to collide in the next moment. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. The hearts of the surrounding 400,000 martial artists were in their throats. It was at this critical juncture. Suddenly, a deep and quiet voice that sounded like a deep valley rang out. You guys have really brought honor to my Sword Dynasty. A figure appeared in the distant sky. He seemed to be walking very slowly on the clouds, but in the blink of an eye, he landed in the middle of the collision between the 2 torrents of energy. That was a peerlessly handsome man with black hair and white robes. He looked as insignificant as an immortal, floating and otherworldly. He had a wine gourd on his waist and a red umbrella in one hand. Although he was standing at the center of the collision between the 2 torrents of energy, there was not the slightest ripple on his face. The man raised his hand, and the red umbrella floated in the void. He stretched his left hand toward Confuzi and his right hand toward Hua Yuntao. Boom. The two torrents of energy were directly blocked by the man's two hands. The terrifying sword chi burst forth in the void, but it could not escape from the man's control. Even Yi Guchen's eyes were secretly shocked. That was a joint attack of the false saint experts. Even though Hua Yuntao and the others did not use their full strength, they could not withstand the attack of so many people. The terrifying torrents of energy were easily blocked by the man. Strong energy waves rolled and collided between the man's palms. After a series of roars, the void returned to silence. The man raised one hand, and the red umbrella floating in the void fell back into his hand. "Greetings, Deputy Alliance Leader." Confuzi cupped his hands and said. "Lord Sword King." Wu Hongyan's beautiful eyes lit up, and she immediately revealed a love-struck look. "Deputy Alliance Leader." The faces of Hua Yuntao and the others also froze. "It's Deputy Alliance Leader, Lord Heavenly Sentiment." "Greetings, Deputy Alliance Leader." After a brief moment of silence, the hundreds of thousands of warriors cupped their hands together, and their voices resounded between heaven and earth. "He is the Deputy Alliance Leader of the Sword Principal Alliance, Sword King Heavenly Sentiment." Yi Guchen suddenly understood the man's identity. "Greetings, Deputy Alliance Leader." Kenpo and the other four sword sons also cupped their hands and bowed. Heavenly Sentiment nodded slightly and glanced at Hua Yuntao and the others. Hua Yuntao and the others looked a little unnatural. Sword King Heavenly Sentiment was the strongest false saint expert in the Sword Dynasty besides the Alliance Leader, Proud Divine Prefecture. Otherwise, he would not have been able to guard the Sword Dynasty alone for so long. The reason why these false saint families did not dare to go too far was because of Heavenly Sentiment. Otherwise, the entire Sword Dynasty would have fallen into civil strife long ago. "You guys are really powerful. As false saints, you want to fight so casually. Where is the dignity of the Sword Principal Alliance?" Heavenly Sentiment's usual warm personality was a little cold at this moment. "We don't dare. This old man is just." Hua Yuntao cupped his hands slightly. Although there was a dark shadow in his eyes, he held it in. Heavenly Sentiment's deterrence was great. No matter what, they were still part of the Sword Principal Alliance. They could not openly contradict Heavenly Sentiment. "I already know the situation. The matter of Mount Saint Crossing is over. Let's disperse," Heavenly Sentiment said lightly. Hua Yuntao and the others were stunned, but in the end, they did not make a move. They knew that with Heavenly Sentiment, the false saint families could no longer do anything to Yi Guchen. By the way, since Dugu Wubai has passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing, he will not only receive the title of a natural saint, but also be a disciple of the holy emblem recognized by the 5 academies. If anyone dares to violate the rules and attack him, don't blame me for being impolite. Heavenly Sentiment's gaze swept over Hua Yuntao and the others. "We don't dare." Hua Yuntao's old face twitched, and a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. "Very good." Heavenly Sentiment nodded lightly. Looking at Heavenly Sentiment, who had resolved the crisis with just a few words, Yi Guchen secretly sighed. She was indeed the famous sword sovereign of the Sword Dynasty. Many of the Sword Dynasty warriors around cast reverent gazes at Heavenly Sentiment. If Heavenly Sentiment had not stabilized the situation of the Sword Dynasty, the warriors of the Sword Dynasty would have been in deep trouble. Therefore, most of the warriors of the Sword Dynasty were extremely respectful to Heavenly Sentiment. Of course, the warriors of the aristocratic families were an exception. If it were not for Heavenly Sentiment, the 5 false saint families would have unified the Sword Dao Alliance. With Heavenly Sentiment, the conflict on Mount Saint Crossing was temporarily over. Of course, Hua Yuntao was unwilling, but it was useless. Seeing this, Hua Wuxia's eyes flashed and he stepped forward. He looked at Yi Guchen and said lightly, "Dugu Wubai, you are indeed unexpected, but talent does not represent strength. The 5 academies competition is not far away. I am also very curious, how strong are you, a natural saint?" Chapter 977. Hua Wuxiao's words made everyone silent for a moment, and then aroused a lot of discussion. Indeed, Yi Guqin's talent had passed the test of Mount Saint Crossing, and no one would doubt it anymore. If he continued to grow, he might not become a saint, but there was no doubt that he would at least become a false saint. But talent was talent, and it could not be equated with strength. Everyone had seen the test of the 20th floor of Mount Saint Crossing. It was more of a test of spiritual will than a test of strength. Yi Guqin had passed the 20th floor, but it did not mean that his battle strength was stronger than Hua Wuxiao's at the 18th floor. Everyone knew that Yi Guqin's realm was only at the 6th stage of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. At this level, even with the help of magic weapons like the 9-Dragon Thunder Prison, how strong could he be? Yes, if Hua Wuxiao hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have thought that Dugu Wubai's current strength was not the top among the geniuses of the Sword Dynasty, right? Indeed, the top 3 of the sword ranking should not be weaker than Dugu Wubai, not to mention those sword sons. Not to mention the top 3 of the sword ranking. Can Dugu Wubai beat Shangguan Jingshan, Jiang Fengmian, and the others? I heard that before in the ancient Chaos Wilderness, Dugu Wubai and Ouyang Fengyan fought to a draw. Hua Wuxiao's words caused many people to come to their senses, especially Shangguan Jingshan. After Yi Guqin had passed the 20th floor, Shangguan Jingshan's face was no longer arrogant, but filled with extreme fear. But now, when he thought about it, it was indeed so. Yi Guqin had not fully grown, and although he was a threat, there was no need to be too afraid. Thinking of this, Shangguan Jingshan's face regained confidence. He said, "Brother Hua is right. Talent is not equal to strength. Dugu Wubai, I, Shangguan Jingshan, will definitely challenge you in the 5 academies competition. And I, Jiang Fengmian, also want to fight with Brother Dugu if possible in the 5 academies competition." Jiang Fengmian smiled faintly. "You two." Mu Xingzu frowned. Obviously, they were targeting Yi Guqin because of Mu Xingzu. "Miss Mu, if Dugu Wubai can defeat me, I won't pester you anymore and let the 2 of you be together." Shangguan Jingshan spoke, his tone full of confidence in himself. Yi Guqin frowned slightly. He and Mu Xingzu did not have that kind of relationship, and he did not want to interfere with Mu Xingzu's feelings. When Mu Xingzu heard this, a faint blush appeared on her pink face. She lowered her head and did not speak. To be honest, Mu Xingzu's feelings for Yi Guqin were mostly respect and admiration for her benefactor and master. However, it was impossible to say that there was no trace of love in it. After all, Mu Xingzu was a young girl in the prime of her youth, and Yi Guqin's performance was so outstanding all the way. If it were any other young girl, it would be difficult to resist Yi Guqin's charm. Yi Guqin pondered for a moment and looked at Mu Xingzu. "Xingzu, do you like him?" Mu Xingzu raised her small head and glanced at Shangguan Jingshan. Her clear eyes were full of annoyance, and she shook her head. "Well, I will help you eliminate him in the 5 academies competition." Yi Guqin stroked Mu Xingzu's head. It seemed to be a casual remark, but it stunned everyone. No matter how bad Shangguan Jingshan was, he was still the 7th divine dwelling heaven's pride on the sword list. Yi Guqin was probably the only one who could say such words in such a relaxed manner. "Okay, I'll wait." Shangguan Jingshan was so angry that he laughed. Regardless of what Yi Guqin would do in the future, at least for now, he could not completely make Shangguan Jingshan fear him. "Let's go." Hua Yuntao glanced coldly at Yi Guqin, flicked his sleeves and left. "Dugu Wubai, I hope you can retain the honor of being a natural saint in the 5 academies competition." Hua Wuxiao smiled faintly and also left. Obviously, he meant that Yi Guqin would be defeated in the 5 academies competition. If Yi Guqin was defeated by others, no matter who the opponent was, it would have an impact on the prestige of being a natural saint. This was also the drag brought by honor. Yi Guqin did not care about Hua Wuxiao's threat. He had seen too many powerful opponents. Moreover, Yi Guqin had gained a lot this time, and by the time the 5 academies competition came, his strength would definitely improve again. With the departure of the Hua family, the other aristocratic families also left. Ouyang Tianji, Yushuang Yanin Wufeng, and the others no longer dared to face Yi Guqin. Perhaps a heaven's pride on the level of Hua Wuxiao was not afraid of Yi Guqin, but they could not. With the departure of the aristocratic families, the atmosphere of the entire Mount Saint crossing also relaxed in an instant. Yi Tianqing looked at Yi Guchen with faint admiration. "Thank you for your help, Deputy Alliance Leader." Yi Guchen cupped his hands. This time, without Yi Tianqing's help, even if Qin Fuzi and Wu Hongyan were there, it was estimated that Hua Yuntao and the others would not give up. "I just dealt with it fairly. Do you feel wrong that I did not punish those aristocratic families this time?" Yi Tianqing smiled faintly. "No, strength is everything. If I had strength, I would not be afraid of anything." Yi Guchen smiled and did not mind. "I really did not misjudge you. Well, let's go back first." Yi Tianqing waved her hand. Then Yi Tianqing and the people of Sacred Cliff College and Tianxian College left together. The matter of Mount Saint crossing had finally come to an end. However, it was conceivable that Yi Guchen's feat of breaking through the 20th floor of Mount Saint crossing would definitely sweep through the entire Sword dynasty, and even the surrounding dynasties like a wildfire. After all, the title of the natural saint was really famous. Of course, there were also many warriors who were curious about Yi Guchen's performance in the Five Academies tournament. Would the legend of the natural saint fall in the Five Academies tournament? On the other side, among the aristocratic families who left, Hua Yuntao's expression was cold. Hua Wuxia said faintly, "Old Hua, don't worry. I will definitely make you lose face in the Five Academies tournament." Although killing is not allowed in the Five Academies tournament, if there is a chance, destroy that evil creature, Hua Yuntao said with a gloomy look. Yi Guchen's talent always made Hua Yuntao feel uneasy. If Yi Guchen was completely destroyed, it would be once and for all. Of course, Dugu Wubai will be more miserable than Ling Emoshu, Hua Wuxiu said confidently. And Yi Tianqing? How long does he think he can suppress the five aristocratic families? It won't be long before he dies, and the five aristocratic families will completely take over the Sword Dao Alliance. My Hua family will be the leader and create a new era of aristocratic families, Hua Yuntao said coldly in his heart. At the thought of that plan, Hua Yuntao's lips curled into a cold smile. How could the five aristocratic families, which had pseudo-saint experts, be willing to be suppressed by Yi Tianqing? The turmoil of the Sword dynasty had just begun. On the other side, on the top of a mountain, a figure with a strange purple mask stood with his hands behind his back. His long purple hair fluttered in the air, and his momentum was extremely powerful. Natural saint, interesting, but how strong is your real strength? Back then, the only opponent that I really valued was Di Haoyan, a 10th grade supreme talent. And between a natural saint and a 10th grade supreme talent, who is stronger? Chapter 978. The incident at Mount Saint Crossing had finally come to an end, but it was conceivable that the storm had just spread and would not die down in a short time. Many sword cultivators in the Sword dynasty were also very curious. How strong was the strongest Heaven's Pride who had passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing, a natural saint? How would he perform in the Five Academies competition? Many people could not help but begin to look forward to it. After the incident at Mount Saint Crossing was over, Yi Guchen and the others returned to Sacred Cliff College. Sword Sovereign Yi Tianqing also left. Along the way, Wu Hongyan, who had always been violent and straightforward, seemed to have changed from a tomboy to a delicate and shy beauty, chatting with Yi Tianqing from time to time. Looking at Wu Hongyan's feminine appearance, the people around were not quite used to it. Especially some of the female disciples of Tianxian College. It was the first time they saw their dean like this. Yi Guchen also understood that the Sword King that Wu Hongyan was talking about was referring to Yi Tianqing. However, Yi Tianqing did not have any feelings for Wu Hongyan. Most of the time, he just leaned against the side of the ship alone, holding a wine gourd and drinking alone. This made Wu Hongyan's beautiful eyes slightly dim, and she felt a little disappointed. Yi Tianqing was a person with a story. Not long after, the group returned to Sacred Cliff College. Come here. Yi Tianqing beckoned Yi Guchen to come over and talk alone. Seeing this scene, the surrounding disciples of Sacred Cliff College showed a look of envy. It was obvious that Yi Tianqing treated Yi Guchen differently. If he could be appreciated by the deputy leader of the Sword dynasty, He naturally did not have to worry about his future. Yi Guchen nodded slightly and followed Yi Tianqing to a secluded place. The dean of the Divine Cliff College, Qin Fuzi, was also there. Haha, little friend Yi, I didn't drink the wine for free, right? Qin Fuzi looked at Yi Guchen and said with a smile. Thank you for your help, seniors. Yi Guchen cupped his hands. Oh, it seems like you're not surprised, Yi Guchen. Heavensoft raised her eyebrows slightly. Now that my identity has been exposed, there's no need to hide anything. Many thanks to the two seniors for not publicly exposing me. Yi Guchen did not try to hide anything. He even felt that the reason Qin Fuzi knew his identity was because of Heavenly Sentiment. I've known since you arrived at the Sword Dynasty, Heavenly Sentiment said with a faint smile. What do you need this junior to do? If it's within my power, this junior will step forward bravely, Yi Guchen said. He knew that Yi Tianqing naturally had her reasons for protecting him like this. He possessed the immemorial demonic sword, God Devourer, and was the target of the Starry Universe Sword Pavilion, Heavenly God Sword Sect, and other Overlord-class forces. It would be too much to say that there was no need for her to protect him like this. Haha, straightforward. Yi Guchen, to be honest, protecting you puts a lot of pressure on the Sword Dao Alliance. If your identity is exposed, the Sword Dynasty will also be targeted by the Overlord-class forces. There is indeed a reason for protecting you, Heavensoft said. Yi Guchen nodded slightly. Heavensoft's admission made him have a good impression of her. At least Heavensoft was not a hypocrite. She spoke without thinking, and when she needed Yi Guchen, she would not hide anything. Is it about Jiankui? Yi Guchen probed. The fight for Jiankui's position was naturally the most important thing for the Sword Dynasty. It was related to the game between the two camps of rogue cultivators and aristocratic families. Kenpo had also mentioned this matter to him before. This is only one of the reasons. The most important thing is the Heavenless Sword Realm. Heavensoft sighed slightly. One of the four great secret realms of the Sword Dynasty, the Heavenless Sword Realm? Yi Guchen was slightly surprised. As the most mysterious and dangerous place of the four great secret realms, the name of the Heavenless Sword Realm did not need to be explained. The Heavenless Sword Realm was also one of the treasures left behind by the 7th generation Sword Master, Nameless. Regarding the Alliance Master's matter of the proud divine continent, I think you already know. My plan is to let some talented sword cultivators go to the Heavenless Sword Realm to investigate the Alliance Master's whereabouts. Heavensoft said. This. Yi Guchen frowned slightly. He was not afraid, but he did not have the slightest understanding of the Heavenless Sword Realm. Don't worry, the Heavenless Sword Realm. According to the realm and strength of the intruder, the degree of difficulty is also different. Your talent in the Sword Dao is unquestionable, and with the immemorial demon sword, it is not impossible to break in. If there is danger, you can also withdraw. There is no need to force you. Heavensoft said. Even so, I am not a coward. The two seniors have done me a favor, and this favor will be repaid. Yi Guchen cupped his hands slightly. He was now a thorn in the side of the Star Universe Sword Pavilion, Divine Sword Sect and other Overlord-level forces. Moreover, he had the immemorial demon sword. Under such circumstances, Heavensoft not only did not covet the demon sword in his body, but also provided protection. This was definitely a great favor. One could imagine, if Heavensoft was a person like Hua Yuntao, what consequences would Yi Guchen have? Moreover, if Yi Guchen's identity was exposed, then what would follow would be endless escape. It would be impossible to cultivate in peace, become a sword master, and prepare for the Heaven's Pride battlefield. Therefore, Heavensoft's favor to Yi Guchen was already very heavy. Well, I'm not asking you to go to the Heavenless Sword Realm now. You'd better cultivate in peace and prepare for the 5 Academies competition and the Sword Master battle. Heavensoft smiled faintly. Yi Guchen nodded, and then suddenly opened his mouth. If I don't have any achievements in Mount Saint Crossing, will Senior Sword King help me? Heavensoft's handsome cheeks slightly paused, and then he shook his head and laughed, spitting out a word. Yes. Thank you. I will take my leave. Yi Guchen cupped his hands and left. Hey, you are indeed a meticulous little fellow. He is testing your true character. The sword master chuckled. Yi Guchen deserves to be called the sword master. No wonder he can become a thorn in the side of those overlord-level forces. I hope that he, a born saint, can quickly grow up in the sword dynasty. After all, there are not many peaceful days left. Heavensoft's eyes flashed with a dark light. Have those aristocratic families also begun to take action? Confuzi said in a deep voice. As long as you can get Big Brother out of trouble, all the conspiracies and tricks will collapse, Heavensoft said. By the way, there is also the incomplete map that this little guy brought before. Confuzi's tone was slightly dignified. Well, it is related to an ancient sacred dynasty. Not only our sword dynasty but also the war god dynasty, the Maluo dynasty, the tyrant saber dynasty and so on. I am afraid that soon there will be another storm. Heavensoft sighed. One wave after another, it was conceivable that a series of major events would happen next. Yi Guchen, who had just left Heavensoft, ran into Bei Xian Elder who hurried over. Young Dugu, the school is about to hold a coronation ceremony for you as a disciple of the Holy Emblem. Bei Xian Elder said excitedly. There is no need for that. Yi Guchen said indifferently. He did not care about this kind of empty title. How can that be? A disciple of the Holy Emblem is recognized by the Supreme Emperor, and his status is second only to the 13 swordsmen. Moreover, after the coronation ceremony, you can enter the seven-sword ancient tower. Bei Xian Elder said. The seven-sword ancient tower. Yi Guchen's eyes lit up. Chapter 979. Yi Guchen did not care about his reputation, so he did not care about his status as a disciple of the Holy Emblem. However, the benefits of being a disciple of the Holy Emblem were not bad. Yi Guchen had heard from Su Fan that only disciples of the Holy Emblem could enter the seven-sword ancient tower. Not only that, Yingning had also said that the seven-sword ancient tower might be related to Sky Mountain. Therefore, Yi Guchen was very curious about the seven-sword ancient tower. All right then. Yi Guchen nodded. Soon, under the guidance of Bei Xian Elder, Yi Guchen arrived at a square. At this moment, there was already a sea of people in the square. Cheers and shouts could be heard without end. Some of the Sacred Cliff College disciples who were in seclusion, or had other matters to attend to, so they did not go to Mount St. Crossing. They were upset that they did not witness the spectacular scene with their own eyes. Senior Dugu is here. Senior Dugu is the best. When the crowd saw Yi Guchen arrive, they were all excited and shouted at the top of their lungs. Yi Guchen had single-handedly revived the reputation of Sacred Cliff College. Duguwubai, come up to the stage. Grand Elder Ime was on a high platform with a smile on his face. Yi Guchen nodded. After he went up to the stage, Grand Elder Ime took out a bright crystal emblem and handed it to Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen took it and looked at the crystal emblem. This emblem was only a symbol of one's status and had no real use. Yi Guchen did not hesitate and kept it in his origin ring. The surrounding disciples were speechless when they saw Yi Guchen's actions. However, they were already used to Yi Guchen's character. Therefore, they were not surprised. Grand Elder Ime also shook his head and smiled bitterly. To other prodigies, being a disciple of the Holy Emblem was a goal to strive for. But for Yi Guchen, it seemed that it was nothing. Cough cough. Young friend Dugu, aren't you going to wear it? Great Elder Ime coughed dryly. There's no need. Being a disciple of the Holy Emblem is just a transition. Maybe. Sword Sun is a good choice. Yi Guchen shook his head. As soon as these words came out, the noisy square instantly fell into absolute silence. Xuanlian, Kong Kong, Han Lingxian, Yin Suk, Su Fan, and the others were all present. Their gazes were also strange. As expected of my master, Mu Xingzu's big eyes were full of smiles. Yi Guchen's words may have shocked a lot of people, but Mu Xingzu believed him. As expected of senior brother Dugu. Some disciples wiped the cold sweat off their foreheads and laughed dryly. But now no one said that Yi Guchen was overestimating himself. With Yi Guchen's natural talent as a sage, it was only a matter of time before he became a Sword Sun. In everyone's opinion, even if he couldn't get the position of Sword Sun this time, he would definitely be able to do it next time. Even Jiang Yan, who disliked Yi Guchen very much, couldn't muster up the courage to go against Yi Guchen now. He could only despise him in his heart. How arrogant! Let's see how capable you are if you qualify for the 5 academies competition. Jiang Yan's face was ugly as he muttered in his heart. As for Ouyang Tianji, he was too ashamed to come to Sacred Cliff College. The person with the most complicated feelings at the scene was probably Ling Mayin. 3 months ago, Yi Guchen was questioned by everyone just because he was a disciple of the Golden Emblem. Ling Mayin even directly said that Yi Guchen was too selfish and arrogant. And now? Only 3 months had passed. Yi Guchen was already a famous natural sage in the Sword Dynasty, and a disciple of the Holy Emblem. Even if he wanted to become a Sword Son, no one would think that Yi Guchen was arrogant. It only took Yi Guchen 3 months to complete this transformation. Looking at Yi Guchen, who was being praised by everyone, Ling Mayin didn't know why, but she felt uncomfortable in her heart. My brother Ling Emoshu used to be so popular too. But after he failed in the 5 academies competition, no one remembered his sacrifice. Ling Mayin lowered her head, her face full of pain. Yi Guchen's gaze fell on Ling Mayin. His eyes narrowed. After a complicated ceremony, Yi Guchen was finally free. Young Dugu will open the 7-sword ancient tower for you in 3 days, Elder Ime said with a smile. Thank you, Elder. Yi Guchen cupped his hands. The 7-sword ancient tower was divided into the inner tower and the outer tower. No Holy Emblem disciple had ever entered the inner tower. However, the disciples who entered the outer tower all made great progress without exception, especially in the area of Sword Dao. Yi Guchen was also very curious. What kind of opportunity could he get in the 7-sword ancient tower? Most importantly, could he enter the inner tower? Other than the 7-sword ancient tower, the Holy Emblem disciples' resources were also very attractive. Yi Guchen could enter the Spirit Gathering Pavilion, Sword Soul Cave, Spiritual Abode Elixir Pool, and other treasured places without restrictions. And he could even get a sacred herb for free. In other aspects, he also had far more resources than a Gold Emblem disciple. Alright, none of you can disturb young Duga's cultivation, Elder Ime said. Now that Yi Guchen was Sacred Cliff College's treasure, they had to nurture him and provide him with a good environment. Next, Yi Guchen could finally have some peace. He also went to get a sacred herb. Next, he just had to wait for the 7-sword ancient tower to open in 3 days. 1 day later, Mu Xingzu and the other Tianxian College disciples would also have to leave to prepare for the 5 academies tournament. Master, you still have to be careful. Hua Wuxia definitely has a reason to be in the top 3 of the sword leaderboard, Mu Xingzu said with concern. Don't worry. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. He would not underestimate any opponent, let alone a rank 7 prodigy like Hua Wuxia. And after the 5 academies tournament, it would be the real battle for the swordmaster position. Before that, he could find out more about Hua Wuxia and the others so that Yi Guchen could be prepared. In the following time, Yi Guchen was not in a hurry to cultivate. He walked around in circles and arrived at a desolate courtyard. This courtyard was overgrown with weeds, and very few people stepped foot in it. Just as he reached the entrance of the courtyard, he smelled a strong smell of alcohol. Yi Guchen pushed open the door, and saw a young man in black leaning against the side of a fake mountain. His right sleeve was empty, and his left hand was holding a jug of alcohol and drinking. It was Ling Emoshu. Seeing Yi Guchen's arrival, Ling Emoshu fell silent for a moment, then took out another jug of alcohol from his origin ring and tossed it to Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen did not say anything. He sat beside Ling Emoshu and drank silently. If you are here to mock me, you can leave after finishing this jug of alcohol. Ling Emoshu smiled dejectedly. Why should I mock you? Yi Guchen asked. I said before that you can't beat the Hua family. Now it seems that you have a chance to fight against Hua Wuxia, Ling Emoshu said. Oh, why me and not you? Yi Guchen said in an inexplicable tone. Oh, are you really here to mock me? Ling Emoshu shook his head and took a big gulp of alcohol. His cultivation was destroyed. His spiritual dwelling was broken, and his right arm that he used to practice swordsmanship was cut off. Ling Emoshu was already a cripple. Yi Guchen still said such words. If it was not mockery, what was it? Yi Guchen also shook his head and smiled. Would you like to hear a story? What story? Ling Emoshu asked. The story of a peerless swordsman who was born blind and whose spiritual dwelling was broken. Chapter 980. He was born blind, but he became a sword expert that shocked an entire dynasty. He and another sword expert had a sword duel. In the end, they were evenly matched, but he was ambushed by a despicable person. As a result, his divine dwelling was destroyed and he became a cripple. But he didn't despair at all. He went into seclusion in the sword pagoda for 10 years to comprehend the true essence of the sword. 10 years of accumulating a sword. Once it was unleashed, it shook the heavens and the earth. His sword was sharper than anyone else's. His will was more unyielding than anyone else's. In the end, he was reborn and comprehended the realm of being one with the heavens. A finger to the heavens, 10,000 swords salute. Yi Guchen enunciated each and every word. His tone was calm, but he was narrating the story of an extraordinary sword cultivator. He was born blind, but he was unyielding. His divine dwelling was destroyed, but he had no regrets. No setback could defeat him. Even Ling Emoshu, who had been paralyzed for a long time, could feel that his blood, which had been silent for a long time, seemed to be showing signs of being ready to move. If possible, who would be willing to sink into oblivion? What you said is just a story after all, Ling Emoshu said, but he couldn't hide the slight tremor in his voice. Yi Guchen looked deeply at Ling Emoshu and said, "What if I say that it's not a story? What if I say that this is the person beside me? This is true?" Ling Emoshu's face froze. He was also a little surprised. Don't think that everyone is like you, willing to sink into the darkness. There are also people who still have a heart for the light in the darkness. Yi Guchen got up and turned to leave. If even the story of Feng Manlu couldn't stimulate Ling Emoshu, Yi Guchen wouldn't meddle in other people's business anymore. Clang! The wine pot in Ling Emoshu's left hand fell to the ground. He clenched his left hand into a fist and smashed it hard on the ground. Blood flowed from his fingers. If I had a choice, who would want to do this? I also want to pick up the sword again, but I can't do it. My right arm is crippled, my left hand is rusty, and my divine dwelling is broken. Watching my little sister turn from naivety to indifference, I feel worse than anyone else. Ling Emoshu's eyes were bloodshot as he roared madly. This was the first time he had let out such a roar after becoming a cripple. At this moment, Ling Moyin appeared at the entrance of the courtyard. She would always take the time to visit Ling Emoshu, but she just happened to witness this scene. "Duguwubai, what did you do to my brother?" He saw Ling Emoshu kneeling on the ground, his fists pounding into the ground. Meanwhile, Yi Guchen stood with his back facing him, his hands clasped behind his back. Anyone would misunderstand and think that Yi Guchen had done something overboard. Ling Moyin's eyes were red. She rushed in and scolded angrily. "Duguwubai, I admit that I was blind. I'm not as good as you, but you can't insult my brother like this." Ling Moyin thought that Yi Guchen must have said something bad to provoke and humiliate Ling Emoshu. "Little Yin, this has nothing to do with Brother Dugu." Ling Emoshu gritted his teeth. He just hated himself. Ling Moyin didn't listen at all. She just stared at Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen didn't explain. He said indifferently, "If you've thought it through, come find me tomorrow." With that, Yi Guchen left in a flash. The Ling siblings were left behind. "Big brother, are you okay?" Ling Moyin helped Ling Emoshu up. "I'm fine, little Yin. I just want to be alone for a while." Ling Emoshu broke free from Ling Moyin's arms and returned to his room alone. The story of Feng Manlu had indeed deeply provoked Ling Emoshu. Looking at Ling Emoshu's back, Ling Moyin clenched her fists tightly. "Duguwubai, why? We're not as good as you, but why did you have to go so far?" No matter how strong Ling Moyin was, 2 lines of tears still fell from the corners of her eyes. She didn't have the strength to avenge Ling Emoshu. She also hated Yi Guchen for treating her brother like this. A sense of powerlessness spread through Ling Moyin's heart. On the other side, Yi Guchen returned to his cave abode. He had already done everything he could for Ling Emoshu. If Ling Emoshu was willing to continue falling, then no one could save him. Yi Guchen didn't mind helping Ling Emoshu. However, he wouldn't lick his face and help others wholeheartedly. If he didn't want to improve himself, then who else could help him? Yi Guchen sat cross-legged, adjusting his breathing and meditating. In less than a day, a figure appeared outside the cave abode, half kneeling on the ground. Yi Guchen slowly walked out, looking at the half-kneeling Ling Emoshu with a calm expression. Have you thought it through? Yi Guchen asked calmly. I want to become stronger. Is there any way for me to become stronger? Ling Emoshu's eyes were bloodshot, and his tone was resolute and decisive. He wasn't willing to carry the title of a cripple. He wasn't willing to continue falling. Okay, but if you want to become stronger again, you'll have to work harder than ordinary people, Yi Guchen said. It doesn't matter. No matter what method it is, as long as it can make me stronger, I'll accept it. Ling Emoshu gritted his teeth. Okay. You should know that although the divine dwelling has been broken, it's not necessarily not a form of destruction. If you can transform it into a flawless divine dwelling, then your strength will be stronger than before, Yi Guchen said. A flawless divine dwelling? Ling Emoshu's eyes lit up, but immediately dimmed. He smiled bitterly and said, It's not that I don't want to be destroyed, but it's extremely difficult to condense a flawless divine dwelling. The quality of a divine dwelling was divided into flawed, flawless, leakless, and almost extinct. Most divine dwelling experts had flawed divine dwellings. Only a very small number of heaven's prides had the ability to transform into a flawless divine dwelling. As for leakless, only supreme heaven's prides like Di Haotian could succeed. Ling Emoshu was once ranked 10th on the sword leaderboard, and a disciple of the Holy Emblem, which meant that his talent and strength were definitely not weak. But to transform into a flawless divine dwelling was indeed a bit of a stretch. As long as you want to, there's nothing impossible in this world. Yi Guchen flipped his hand, took out a jade bottle, and handed it to Ling Emoshu. Ling Emoshu opened it and saw a golden pill lying inside, exuding a strange fluctuation. This is, Ling Emoshu said bitterly. A nirvana pill, Yi Guchen said. Yi Guchen had obtained 10 nirvana pills in the tomb of the ancient chaos wasteland. He had given one to Su Jiqing, so there were 9 left. The effect of the nirvana pill was to transform the physical body, sea of consciousness, divine dwelling, and so on. Of course, it didn't mean that the next nirvana pill would transform into a flawless divine dwelling. It only meant that the possibility would increase. A pill that could directly transform a person into a flawless divine dwelling, regardless of whether it existed or not, was definitely a rare and priceless treasure. This is too precious. Ling Emoshu's hands trembled slightly. The nirvana pill was too precious. Even if it only increased the possibility, it was precious enough. If word got out, a large number of divine dwelling heaven's prides would be extremely jealous. Ling Emoshu didn't expect Yi Guchen to give him such a precious pill. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. Take it, but don't consume it immediately. It might be more effective if you consume it after cultivating for a while. Ling Emoshu's eyes were bloodshot. He suddenly kowtowed 3 times to Yi Guchen and growled. No matter what happens in the end, I will never forget this kindness. Chapter 981. Get up, we still have to practice swordsmanship. Yi Guchen helped Ling Emoshu up. Practice swordsmanship. Ling Emoshu clenched his left hand. He was not left-handed, and his right hand was the most agile. However, it had been broken by Wuxia. It was extremely difficult to practice swordsmanship again with his left hand. Without 8 to 10 years, he would not even be able to enter the door. If he delayed for such a long time, Ling Emoshu would have been left far behind by his peers. This was also the reason why Ling Emoshu had been dispirited previously. It was because he could not see any hope. Left-handed swordsmanship is both difficult and easy. Who knows, you might become a left-handed swordsman in the future. Yi Guchen said with a faint smile. Brother Dugu, you must be joking. How is that possible? Ling Emoshu shook his head slightly. Although he was not old, he was not young either. It was almost impossible for him to become a left-handed swordsman in less than a few decades. I said before that there is nothing impossible in this world. Look. Yi Guchen smiled faintly and took out the 9-dragon thunder prison, and another mystical pattern divine weapon. Ling Emoshu looked at this scene, and was slightly puzzled. Since the beginning of the Sword Dynasty, Yi Guchen had never displayed the ability to use 2 swords. Therefore, no one knew that Yi Guchen could wield a sword with both hands. Moreover, the dexterity and proficiency of his left hand were not inferior to his right hand. Yi Guchen held the swords with both hands and started to fight with each other. As the swords collided, sparks flew continuously. The sword shadows caused Ling Emoshu's expression to freeze immediately. This is. Ling Emoshu took a deep breath. He was stunned. Yi Guchen's left-hand swords were not inferior to his right-hand swords at all. At this moment, Yi Guchen's 2 hands seemed to have independent thoughts as they each attacked and blocked. How is this possible? Ling Emoshu was extremely shocked. It was already extremely surprising that Yi Guchen could have such achievements at such a young age. What was even more unexpected was that Yi Guchen had such a high level of proficiency with the sword in his left hand. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, Ling Emoshu would have thought that Yi Guchen was possessed by some sword expert. Next, I will teach you a technique called the left and right interfighting technique. Although you have lost your right arm, you can still cultivate it with your left hand, Yi Guchen said. Then he taught Ling Emoshu all kinds of cultivation methods. Ling Emoshu was suddenly enlightened as if he had been enlightened. It was as if he finally saw a utopia after many obstacles. He had never seen or heard of such a cultivation method before. Moreover, after a moment, after comprehending it, with this technique master, Yi to be to use to learn to learn to use to learn to master to swords in a short time. Learn to master even if he did not directly become a left-handed swordsman. At least his proficiency would not be weaker than that of his right-hand swordsman. Brother Dugu, this kindness is like giving me a new life. In the future, no matter who or what, as long as Brother Dugu needs me, I will repay you with my life. Ling Emoshu bowed deeply to Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's kindness to him was too great. Oh, you don't have to do that. If nothing unexpected happens, you can also participate in the 5 Academies competition, Yi Guchen said with a smile. Ling Emoshu's face became serious, and immediately his eyes surged with fighting spirit. He was very curious. When he, a fallen genius, appeared in the 5 Academies competition again, how would Hua Wuxia and the others look? Next, you should focus on diligent cultivation. When it's about time, take the Nirvana pill, Yi Guchen said. Thank you, Brother Dugu. After thanking him repeatedly, Ling Emoshu left. Looking at Ling Emoshu's back, Yi Guchen shook his head and smiled. Supporting the Divine Cliff Academy by myself is also very tiring. Let Brother Ling help share some of the burden. There was another reason why Yi Guchen helped Ling Emoshu, and that was to repay Sacred Cliff College. Yi Guchen would definitely not stay in Sacred Cliff College for a long time. After leaving him, Sacred Cliff College only had Xuanlian, a disciple of the Holy Emblem, to support it. If Ling Emoshu could rise again, Sacred Cliff College would not lose its reputation. On the other hand, Ling Emoshu began to practice his swordsmanship crazily after returning to his courtyard. Not long after, a black figure walked to the gate of the courtyard. It was Ling Mayin. She was afraid that her brother would be agitated by Yi Guchen's words and develop negative emotions, so she would come to visit him every few hours. This time, Ling Mayin's body froze at the gate of the courtyard. Her slender hand covered her red lips, and her beautiful eyes widened as she looked at the figure in the courtyard in disbelief. Ling Emoshu held a sword in his left hand, and he was in high spirits. His eyes flashed with unprecedented excitement. Ling Mayin was stunned. She could not believe what she was seeing was real. Ever since Ling Emoshu was crippled, he had never held a sword again. He spent his days drinking, not to mention practicing swordsmanship. Ling Mayin even thought that she was hallucinating. Brother? Ling Mayin murmured. Little Ian, you're here? Ling Emoshu smiled faintly at Ling Mayin. How long had it been since Ling Emoshu smiled? Big brother, how did you? Ling Mayin's mind was in a mess. At this moment, Ling Emoshu seemed to have returned to the past and become the brother she respected and loved. I'm sorry, little Een. Because of Big Brother's self-degradation, you have to bear so much pressure. After Brother Duga's words of enlightenment, I've come to a complete realization. From now on, I will rise again. Ling Emoshu's eyes flash with confidence. Duga Wubai has enlightened you? What is going on? Ling Mayin was completely confused. Hadn't Yi Guchen previously humiliated Ling Emoshu? Little Een, you've misunderstood Big Brother Dugu. Ling Emoshu told Ling Mayin everything that had happened. What? Dugu Wubai was trying to persuade you? He even gave you the holy nirvana pill and taught you cultivation techniques? Ling Mayin's mind was in a mess. She never would have thought that the person who would save Ling Emoshu in the end would be Yi Guchen. She then thought back to when they were on their way to Mount Saint Crossing. Yi Guchen's seemingly harsh words had also provoked Ling Emoshu's numb heart. Now that she thought about it, everything made sense. So, I've misunderstood Dugu Wubai from the beginning. I was really blind not because I didn't see through his talent and strength, but because I didn't see through his character. Ling Mayin laughed at herself. From the beginning to the end, she was the one who had gauged the heart of a gentleman with her own yardstick. As for Yi Guchen, he had never explained anything to her, nor had he targeted her. Thinking about it this way, Ling Mayin felt that she was completely stupid and unbearably harsh. Little Een, apologized to Big Brother Dugu. Ling Emoshu sighed. I know. I've been terribly wrong. Ling Mayin nodded and left in a daze. On the other side, Yi Guchen was meditating in his cave abode, quietly waiting for the seven-sword ancient tower to come. Dugu Wubai. A woman's slightly nervous voice came from outside the cave abode. When he heard this voice, Yi Guchen's eyes dimmed and he said calmly, come in. Ling Mayin, who was wearing a long black dress, walked in. She was tall and slender, and her face was exquisite even though she wasn't extremely beautiful. But at this moment, her face was filled with complex emotions, nervousness, shame, and embarrassment. I'm sorry. Ling Mayin lowered her head. Ling Mayin was arrogant. But at this moment, she was sincerely apologizing from the bottom of her heart and begging for Yi Guchen's forgiveness. Forget it. Yi Guchen waved his hand. He didn't care about Ling Mayin's apology. Seeing Yi Guchen's cold attitude, Ling Mayin bit her lip. Her delicate body suddenly twisted slightly like a mermaid. Her long black dress was removed, revealing her snow-white body that was like freshly peeled chestnuts. Chapter 982. The scene in front of him was indeed hard to control. Any man would find it hard to resist seeing the cold and indifferent Ling Mayin undress herself. However, Yi Guchen frowned slightly and said, What do you mean by this? At this moment, Ling Mayin's snow-white cheeks couldn't help but blush. She suppressed her shyness and said, Dugu Wubai, Mayin admits that I did go overboard with you in the past. Ever since you came to Sacred Cliff College, I've been doubting you. You saved my life in the ancient Chaos Wasteland, but my opinion of you still hasn't changed. You put in so much effort to help Big Brother, and even took out a rare elixir like the Holy Nirvana pill, but I was still blind and misunderstood you. I apologize for my attitude towards you in the past, and I can't repay the kindness you've shown me and Big Brother. I can only repay you with my body. Ling Mayin finished speaking in a trembling voice. Yi Guchen's expression was calm and he said, Put it on. This is the true insult to me. This. Ling Mayin lowered her head and was slightly embarrassed. In the end, she still put on her clothes, but she still said, No matter what, us siblings owe you. If you still haven't vented your anger, even if you want me to be your servant or concubine, it's fine. Alright, I don't mind. Yi Guchen felt a headache coming on. Ling Mayin's personality was really stubborn. After receiving Yi Guchen's forgiveness, Ling Mayin breathed a sigh of relief. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Yi Guchen was slightly taken aback. This was the first time he had seen Ling Mayin smile. You should smile more. Yi Guchen sighed. Ling Mayin's cheeks flushed red when she heard this, and then she left in a panic. Looking at Ling Mayin's back as she left, Yi Guchen was slightly taken aback, but he didn't care. After that, Yiguchen continued to meditate and recuperate. In the blink of an eye, a day had passed. It was finally the day of the Seven-Sword Ancient Pagoda's opening. The Seven-Sword Ancient Tower was the oldest place in Sacred Cliff College. Even before Sacred Cliff College, the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower had already existed. Only the disciples of the Holy Emblem had the right to enter the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower. With such a high threshold, most of the disciples were not fated with it. However, this did not hinder their enthusiasm for watching. The Seven-Sword Ancient Tower was located in the deepest core of the Divine Cliff Grotto Heaven. The entire Sacred Cliff College was also expanding outwards with the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower as the center. Under the guidance of Bai-Xian Elder, Yiguchen finally arrived at the Seven-Sword Ancient Pagoda. He looked over and saw an antique ancient tower with an aura of history standing at the peak of the sea of clouds in the distance. The ancient tower looked extremely old, as if it would collapse at any moment. However, it seemed to be protected by a mysterious force that allowed it to stand for thousands of years. Is that the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower? Yiguchen's eyes lit up. For some reason, Yiguchen had a strange feeling when he saw the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower. This feeling was extremely strange and indescribable. At this moment, the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower was surrounded by Sacred Cliff College disciples. Yiguchen was now the most popular person in Sacred Cliff College. If not for Grand Elder Imei's order to not disturb Yiguchen's cultivation, a group of people would have gathered outside Yiguchen's cave residence every day. Senior Dugu is here. TSK, the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower hasn't been opened for a long time. This is a rare event. Do you think Senior Dugu can enter the legendary Inner Tower? I think it'll be difficult. Even Senior Xuanlian couldn't enter the Inner Tower. Seeing Yiguchen's arrival, there was an uproar in the surroundings. Xuanlian, Kong, Han Lingxian, Yin Chok, Su Fan, Ling Mayin and the others were all there. Especially Ling Mayin. She seemed to have changed into a different person. Her face was no longer cold and harsh. Instead, it was very gentle and there was always a faint smile on her face. Senior Sister Ling has changed. She even greeted me today. Some of the surrounding disciples looked at Ling Mayin with a strange expression. As for Ling Emoshu, he had been cultivating in seclusion, and didn't even go out of the courtyard. Therefore in Sacred Cliff College, other than Yiguchen and Ling Mayin, no one knew that Ling Emoshu, who had been silent for a long time, had started to rise again like the sun. Seeing Yiguchen arrive, Ling Mayin was a little uneasy, but she bit her lip and went up to him. Dugu Wubai, you're here. Yes. Yiguchen smiled and nodded slightly. He wouldn't go so far as to argue with a girl. In fact, Yiguchen never cared that Ling Mayin was against him. Did the sun rise from the west? All the Sacred Cliff College disciples were stunned. Doesn't Senior Sister Ling dislike Senior Brother Dugu the most? How can that be? Many people were stunned. Even Bai-Xian Elder looked at Ling Mayin strangely. Ling Mayin's jade-like face was burning as she lowered her head. Alright Dugu, you have to make good use of the opportunity in the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower. Let's not talk about the Inner Tower for now. Even if you can only enter the Outer Tower, you might be able to obtain an unimaginable sword opportunity, Bai-Xian Elder said with a smile. Yiguchen was now Sacred Cliff College's treasure. The more opportunities Yiguchen obtained, the greater his improvement, and the better it would be for Sacred Cliff College. Yes, thank you for your advice, Elder. Yiguchen nodded. In fact, Yiguchen's ambition was not limited to the Outer Tower. If possible, he also wanted to see what secrets were hidden in the Inner Tower. What did it have to do with the Sky Mountain that Yingning mentioned? Then the 5 temple leaders arrived at the same time. This was because only the presence of all 5 hall masters could break the formation outside the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower. Rumble. Following a loud explosion, the sea of clouds outside the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower dissipated, and the entire ancient tower was revealed to Yiguchen. Dugu Wubai enter, temple leader Luofeng said. He no longer held any grudges against Yiguchen. Yiguchen nodded slightly, pushed open the door of the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower, and stepped inside. I wonder what kind of opportunity Brother Dugu will obtain. Xuanlian mumbled to himself. He had entered the seven-sword ancient tower before, so he naturally knew how many opportunities there were in the tower. The moment Yi Guchen stepped into the seven-sword ancient tower, the entire door was sealed shut. Yi Guchen looked around and saw 7 balls of light flying around in the seven-sword ancient tower. Every ball of light had a different color, but without exception, they all emitted extremely powerful fluctuations. Is the so-called opportunity of the sword in the 7 balls of light? Yi Guchen mumbled to himself. He suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed a ball of light. However, the ball of light struggled to break free from Yi Guchen's grasp and flew away. Interesting. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. These balls of light definitely contained extremely profound cultivation methods and martial arts. Ordinary disciples might not have the opportunity to obtain them, and even if they did, it would be difficult for them to cultivate successfully. It was no wonder that only the disciples of the Holy Emblem were qualified to enter to inherit opportunities. Chapter 983. Before entering the seven-sword ancient pagoda, Xuanlian had told Yi Guchen some things. For example, the 7 balls of light outside the pagoda represented 7 opportunities. Anyone who entered the pagoda could only obtain one of the opportunities. Once you obtained the inheritance of one of the balls of light, you would not be able to obtain the inheritance of the other balls of light. If you were not careful and chose an opportunity that was not suitable for you, you would be in deep trouble. Therefore, choosing the most suitable opportunity was undoubtedly the most important. Even a disciple of the Holy Emblem could only enter the seven-sword ancient pagoda once. Therefore, Yi Guchen would definitely choose carefully and make good use of this opportunity. Since I can't take the balls of light, I'll let you choose me. Yi Guchen thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. Why did he have to choose for himself? Wasn't it better to leave the choice to the opportunities? Thinking of this, Yi Guchen made up his mind. His body shook violently. He performed the Azura sword principle. Then he performed the 5 elements sword principle and the edgeless sword principle. The lightning sword essence that he had comprehended to the extreme also spread out. As these sword essences and sword daras spread out, 3 of the 7 balls of light suddenly vibrated. Yi Guchen released the illuminated sword heart again, and 2 more balls of light shook. Yi Guchen performed the union of man and sword, and the last 2 balls of light also started to shake. In the end, the 7 balls of light surrounded Yi Guchen, as if they were fighting for Yi Guchen to inherit. Yi Guchen was stunned. This scene was beyond his expectations, and he did not know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, he still had to make a choice. Yi Guchen muttered to himself as he looked at the balls of light one by one. Just as Yi Guchen was about to make a choice, he suddenly looked at the walls of the pagoda from the corner of his eye. There were many ancient sword marks on the walls, and they looked messy and disorderly, as if they were just ordinary marks. However, Yi Guchen's gaze suddenly froze. How could an ancient and mysterious place like the seven-sword ancient pagoda have so many sword marks? Thinking up to this point, Yi Guchen could not help but slow down his movements. Instead, he began to carefully comprehend the sword marks on the walls. He had the sword demon talent, the enlightened sword heart, and the help of the enlightenment ancient tree. Yi Guchen's comprehension ability could be said to be a peerless monster. Before long, in Yi Guchen's eyes, the sword marks on the walls seemed to have transformed into a kind of cultivation method. A unique ripple spread throughout the seven-sword ancient tower. As the ripples spread out, the 7 balls of light of different colors suddenly collided and entangled together. Under Yi Guchen's slightly surprised gaze, it finally turned into a dazzling golden ball of light. A golden jade slip could be faintly seen floating within the ball of light. Is this the greatest opportunity? Even with Yi Guchen's calm personality, he was extremely surprised. He had thought that the opportunities in the seven-sword ancient tower were the inheritances in the 7 balls of light. Who would have thought that the 7 balls of light could merge into one to form an opportunity? Even a fool would know that the value of this opportunity was definitely incomparable to the previous 7 balls of light. Yi Guchen reached out and took the golden jade slip, then crushed it. Then, lines of ancient golden words appeared in the void. Yi Guchen looked at it and was immersed in it. Beside him, Su Qingyu's primordial spirit also appeared. He glanced at the ancient words with a look of surprise. To be able to make a heavenly tribulation saint look surprised, this cultivation method must be special. After a series of memories, the ancient golden character also dissipated in the void. Yi Guchen only just came back to his senses, but his eyes were also filled with shock. The fortuitous encounter he had obtained was truly extraordinary. This is the cultivation method of the ultimate sword domain. Yi Guchen took a deep breath and calmed himself down. The so-called ultimate sword domain was a special cultivation method. Everyone knew that the sword principle could transform into a sword principle domain. The sword principle domain was also one of the signature moves of a sword cultivator. The cultivation method of the ultimate sword domain was aimed at the sword principle domain. This cultivation method was to combine and stack the sword principle domain together to unleash a terrifying power. The power of the sword principle domain was extremely strong. Yi Guchen could not imagine how strong the power would be if the sword principle domain was combined and stacked together. Ultimate sword realm. What a crazy way to cultivate. Even Su Qingyu was amazed by it. Even he had never heard of such a cultivation method. Although the power is strong, the threshold and difficulty of cultivation are also very high, Yi Guchen said. He had already memorized the cultivation method of the ultimate sword domain, which was why he was so amazed. In order to begin cultivating ultimate sword domain, the most basic requirement was to possess 3 types of sword principles. Moreover, they had to be of the unparalleled sword principle level. Ordinary sword principles would not do. This condition was extremely difficult. Even Wuxia, Jian Jinghong, and the others could not meet the requirement to have 3 unparalleled sword principles. Even the overlord forces could not find many geniuses who had 3 unparalleled sword principles. Other than Yi Guchen, the other geniuses would not be able to cultivate it at all. However, the 3 supreme sword principles could only be used to cultivate the ultimate sword domain. The complete ultimate sword domain required the combination of at least 4 unparalleled sword principles. The more unparalleled sword principles were integrated, the more powerful the ultimate sword domain would be. Of course, it would be more difficult. As for the peak of the ultimate sword domain, the most powerful ultimate sword domain, it required the integration of creation-level sword principles. This cultivation method was definitely dozens of times more difficult than emperor-level martial arts. Although it is extremely difficult to cultivate the ultimate sword domain, if I can succeed, it will definitely become my trump card and killer move. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. If Yi Guchen had the ultimate sword domain as his trump card, he would be able to compete in the 5 Academies tournament and the Battle of the Swordmaster. Even in the battlefield where geniuses gathered, Yi Guchen would be able to dominate all the geniuses with the ultimate sword domain. I have gained a lot from entering the 7-sword ancient tower this time. However, where is the inner tower? After obtaining the ultimate sword domain, Yi Guchen calmed down. Yi Guchen calmed down. The entire 7-sword ancient tower did not have a 2nd or 3rd floor, nor did it have any compartments. Hence, he did not know where the inner tower was. Perhaps it did not even exist. Impossible. The inner tower must exist. Where is it? Yi Guchen sat cross-legged on the ground and started to think. He suddenly saw that the entire floor of the tower seemed to have formed an array. The so-called inner tower may not refer to a space, but a state of being, Su Qingyu reminded him. A state. Yi Guchen looked at the array on the ground and suddenly closed his eyes. The sea of consciousness in his mind spun. Waves of soul power spread out, trying to sink into the array on the ground. The array on the ground suddenly released a strong repulsive force. Break. Yi Guchen's sea of consciousness spun wildly. The terrifying soul power broke through the array's seal. Almost instantly, Yi Guchen felt the world around him spinning. In an instant, the scenery around him twisted and changed into a strange place. Chapter 984. Yi Guchen seemed to be in the depths of the void, and the scenery around him was constantly changing. Yi Guchen squinted his eyes and looked carefully. Suddenly he saw a picture. It was a towering mountain in the depths of the void. It was unknown how tall it was, but it seemed to reach into the stars. Could that be? Yi Guchen's eyes suddenly focused, although he had never seen it before. However, Yi Guchen had an intuition that something was wrong. It was a towering mountain that towered into the stars in the depths of the void. It was the base of Sky Mountain, one of the 3 hidden forces in the Nantian region. Senior Yingning said that there might be clues about Sky Mountain in the 7-sword ancient pagoda. Could this be it? Yi Guchen thought to himself as he continued to observe. At this moment, the scene changed again. From the towering mountain, endless sword cries rang out. The void exploded, as if an intense battle was taking place. 7 rays of light shot out from the depths of the mountain. One could vaguely see the figures in the light. Those 7 people are. Yi Guchen looked carefully. He suddenly understood why there were only 7 balls of light in the 7-sword ancient pagoda. They might represent some of the martial arts inheritance of the 7 figures. The ultimate sword domain that Yi Guchen obtained might be the core essence of the 7 people's inheritance. It might even be an ultimate technique from Sky Mountain. Yi Guchen also understood. No wonder even the knowledgeable Su Qingyu had never seen this kind of cultivation method. If it was from Sky Mountain, then it made sense. With Sky Mountain's mysterious status, it was not surprising that they had such a terrifying cultivation method as the ultimate sword domain. Yi Guchen continued to watch. Are the 7 of you going to betray the sword tribe of Sky Mountain and do something against the heavens? In the scene, a mighty voice came from Sky Mountain. The 9 zones have decayed and need to change the world. The 7 of us will go down the mountain and create a new world. One of the 7 figures said. The 7 of them went down the mountain. It was 7 swords down Sky Mountain. Then the scene changed again. Among the 7 people, there were some sword principle experts. In the end, those sword principle experts worked together to create an alliance. It was the predecessor of the Sword Principle Alliance and the prototype of the Sword Dynasty. So that's what happened. Yi Guchen sighed. The next scene showed that the 7 swords went into the depths of the void, as if they were carrying out some plan. Besides the 7 swords, some descendants of the 7 swords also appeared. Then, the scene shattered and the surroundings returned to the void. Yi Guchen was shocked. He let out a long sigh of relief. He did not expect that he would be able to find such a secret in the 7-sword ancient pagoda. On the mysterious heavenly mountain, there lived a clan called the Sword Clan. The 7 down sky was also to the 7 swords down sky, was to surprise. Even the establishment of the Sword Dao Alliance and the Sword Dynasty was indirectly related to the 7 swords. Could it be that Senior Yingning's lover from 1,000 years ago is the descendant of the 7 swords? It was not impossible. Yi Guchen thought about his background and his mysterious father. Is my father also from the Sword Clan of Sky Mountain? Or is he the descendant of the 7 swords? Yi Guchen's mind was full of thoughts. The more he learned, the more confused he became. Why did the 7 swords betray the Sword Clan of Sky Mountain? What did it mean that the 9 zones had decayed? What was the new world created by the next 7 swords? Yi Guchen had even more questions in his mind. After thinking for a while, Yi Guchen still couldn't figure it out. But at least he had a basic understanding of Sky Mountain. He was no longer clueless. The Sword Clan of Sky Mountain is on par with the Immortal Valley, and is even stronger than the Overlords. I'm really curious, Yi Guchen thought to himself. He was also very curious about the Sword Clan of Sky Mountain, which was related to his background. Yi Guchen thought about the Heavenly Eye Emperor's words. His background was related to the 100 clans of the heavens. Was the Sword Clan of Sky Mountain one of the 100 clans of the heavens? What did the Heavenly Eye Emperor mean when he said they were a forbidden clan? It seems that I have to make a trip to Sky Mountain in the future to solve these mysteries, Yi Guchen thought to himself. But all of this was built on the premise of strength. Yi Guchen could not even reveal his identity now. He had to wait until the future to explore the secrets of the Sword Clan. It's about time, Yi Guchen said. Yi Guchen also found out the secrets recorded in the inner tower. At this moment, the void in front of Yi Guchen suddenly rippled like water. Then a strange jade seal floated in the void. This is the Imperial Jade Seal? Yi Guchen was surprised. The imperial jade seal was as black as ink, as if it was carved out of black jade. Yi Guchen took it, and did not find anything special about it. He turned to take a look. At the bottom of the imperial jade seal, there was an image of 7 swords overlapping each other. Is this imperial jade seal related to the 7 swords? Yi Guchen frowned and pondered. At this moment, the scene around Yi Guchen suddenly distorted and shattered. Yi Guchen's mind trembled. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself back inside the 7 swords ancient pagoda. Yi Guchen was still holding the black imperial jade seal in his hand. Yi Guchen felt that the black imperial jade seal definitely had a big secret. After keeping the black imperial jade seal in his origin ring, Yi Guchen stood up. Yi Guchen had gained a lot from this trip to the 7-sword ancient tower. The ultimate sword domain was definitely comparable to the 10,000 god tribulation, and a powerful trump card of the Eye of the Void. In addition, Yi Guchen also learned about Sky Mountain. He also obtained a mysterious imperial jade seal. It was a fruitful trip. It was different from when he entered the 7-sword ancient tower, and obtained a single inheritance of the 7 swords. The ultimate sword domain that Yi Guchen obtained was definitely more valuable than a single inheritance. Yi Guchen was satisfied and stepped out of the 7-sword ancient tower. As soon as Yi Guchen opened the door, he felt countless gazes on him. The gazes of the Divine Cliff Academy's disciples were glued to Yi Guchen. Beixian Elder and the 5 temple masters stared at Yi Guchen. If Yi Guchen could gain something and increase his strength, it would be a good thing for Sacred Cliff College. Dugu, how did it go? Beixian Elder asked eagerly. You can say that I gained something. Yi Guchen nodded with a smile. Seeing Yi Guchen's expression, Beixian Elder and the 5 temple masters heaved a sigh of relief. If he could gain something, it meant that the trip was worth it. I told you, there's no doubt about it. Senior Dugu is so talented. How could he not get an opportunity? That's right. Even if he didn't enter the inner tower, the opportunity in the outer tower is precious enough. The surrounding disciples were all laughing. They were also proud that Yi Guchen could increase his strength and bring glory to the college. Hearing the voices around him, Yi Guchen smiled faintly. He didn't tell them that he entered the inner tower. The secret of the Sky Mountain Sword Tribe was not a big deal, but the Black Imperial Jade Seal could not be revealed. Therefore, Yi Guchen didn't explain anything and let everyone misunderstand. He was not a person who was greedy for vanity. Dugu, you have to prepare for the 5 academies competition and the battle for the Sword Master title, Beixian Elder warned. Yi Guchen narrowed his eyes and nodded with a smile. The 5 academies competition, huh? I haven't fought with my peers for a long time. Yi Guchen muttered to himself. Chapter 985. There was no doubt that Yi Guchen was a battle maniac. Whether it was Xia Yubing, Xianhao Gu Xiaoyang, or even Di Haotian, Yi Guchen could be said to have fought his way to where he was now. Which battle wasn't soul-stirring and blood-boiling? And in the Sword Dynasty, Yi Guchen hadn't really fought to his heart's content with his peers. I hope that Hua Wuxia, the 7th grade prodigy, won't disappoint me, Yi Guchen said to himself with a faint smile. After the incident at the 7-sword ancient tower, Yi Guchen resumed his quiet cultivation. This was because Yi Guchen was a disciple of the Holy Emblem and a natural-born sage. He could also cultivate in the Spirit Gathering Pavilion and the Sword Soul Cave without any restrictions. This day in the Sword Soul Cave, Yi Guchen slowly opened his eyes and frowned slightly. It's still difficult to find a trace of opportunity for the Lightning Sword intent, and the same goes for the All-Creation Sword intent. During this period, Yi Guchen had been comprehending the sword principle. Ever since the baptism of the heavenly tribulation on Mount Saint Crossing, Yi Guchen's lightning sword intent had been perfected, and was only a step away from transforming into a sword principle. If he could successfully transform into the lightning sword principle, Yi Guchen would not only be able to display the sword territory exclusive to the lightning sword principle, but he would also completely fulfill the requirements for cultivating the ultimate sword domain. It could be said that this step was very important. However, Yi Guchen still couldn't find this thin bottleneck. After all, it's a peerless sword principle. It's not that simple. Yi Guchen shook his head and smiled. No matter how talented he was, what he comprehended was a peerless sword principle, and it couldn't be smooth sailing. If even the lightning sword intent was like this, needless to say, the creation sword intent of all creation wouldn't progress quickly either. As for the ultimate sword domain, he hadn't even started cultivating it. Cultivating in the Sword Soul Cave isn't of much help to me. It's time to make a trip to the Sword Tomb, Yi Guchen said to himself. In the 5 academies competition and the battle for the position of Sword Master, the stronger Yi Guchen was, the better. With that thought in mind, Yi Guchen left the Sword Soul Cave. As soon as he came out of the cave, he saw a beautiful black figure standing at the entrance. It was Ling Mayin. Seeing Yi Guchen come out, Ling Mayin immediately went forward and handed him a vital ring. She said, Beixian Elder was worried that you might not have enough cultivation resources, so he asked me to bring you some more. When Yi Guchen heard this, he smiled faintly and said, That's enough. You can distribute these resources among yourselves. Ever since Yi Guchen became a natural saint, Sacred Cliff College spared no effort in nurturing him. Other than those extremely rare sacred medicines and other resources, Yi Guchen could take whatever he wanted. However, Yi Guchen had enough resources now. Moreover, his current cultivation was not something that could be achieved by accumulating resources alone. Therefore, he declined politely. Ling Mayin did not hesitate and took it back. Seeing Ling Mayin hesitating to speak, Yi Guchen said faintly, Is there anything else? Ling Mayin seemed to have thought of something, and a wisp of anger appeared in her beautiful eyes. She said, Recently there have been some bad rumors in the outside world. Oh, what rumors? Yi Guchen tilted his head slightly. They said that your title as a natural saint is just a false reputation and a silver spearhead. It's too much. Ling Mayin could not help but scold him coldly. Oh, it should be the Hua family and other fake sacred families in Tensei College who are working together to promote it, but it doesn't matter. Yi Guchen smiled and shook his head. Yi Guchen did not care about false reputation at all, so naturally he did not care about the slander of the Hua family. But what they said is too unpleasant. They said that in the 5 academies competition, you will be defeated by Hua Wuxia. The more Ling Mayin thought about it, the angrier she became. I didn't expect that there would be a day when you would stand up for me. Yi Guchen sighed and laughed. Ling Mayin immediately stopped talking, and a layer of bright red immediately appeared on her white jade face. She remembered her attitude at the beginning, and compared with now, it was indeed a world of difference. Well, I want to go to the Sword Tomb. Is that okay? Yi Guchen asked. Well, the Sword Tomb is open all year round, and any swordsman can enter. The first time you enter, you will gain the most. You should indeed go, but there is a place in the Sword Tomb that you must not set foot in, Ling Mayin said. What place? Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows. The Solitary Cloud Sword Sage's Retreat. Ling Mayin said in a solemn tone. The Solitary Cloud Sword Sage. Leng Qianhen? Yi Guchen was surprised. Yi Guchen was indeed familiar with the Solitary Cloud Sword Sage. Back in the Infinite Wilderness Plain, among the helpers invited by Mo Tianfeng, the strongest was the Solitary Cloud Sword Sage Leng Qianhen, who was a fake sage expert. That's right. Although Sword Saint Gu Yun was powerful, he was cold and arrogant, and always acted alone. Back then, even the Alliance Master was unable to pull Sword Saint Gu Yun into the Sword Alliance. However, he did promise that Sword Saint Gu Yun could cultivate freely in the Sword Tomb. That Sword Saint Gu Yun also created a place of seclusion in the Sword Tomb. If anyone were to step into that place, although they would not be killed directly, they would be seriously injured and thrown out. Therefore, that place must not be set foot in, Ling Mayin said in a serious tone. Obviously, many people must have been at a disadvantage. They had mistakenly stepped into Leng Qianhen's retreat, and were directly thrown out with serious injuries. Yi Guchen's eyes flickered when he heard that. Leng Qianhen's character could be seen from the time he was in the Tianhuang Plains. In the face of the overlord forces such as the Starry Sword Pavilion, the other 2 helpers, the Master of the Red Cloud House and Huangfu Dingtao, were a little scared. Only Leng Qianhen did not move and did not show the slightest fear. Yi Guchen was not 100% sure about Leng Qianhen's character. But at least Leng Qianhen was clear about kindness and hatred. He would repay kindness and never owed others. Although Sacred Cliff College is protecting me now, compared to the Hua family and other forces, I'm still inferior. If I can ask Leng Qianhen for help. Yi Guchen thought to himself. Sacred Cliff College was not weak, but it was still inferior to the 5 fake saint families. If he could get Leng Qianhen's help, it would undoubtedly be a good layer of protection. However, Leng Qianhen was arrogant and unapproachable. Even the proud divine state had tried to rope him in, but failed. Mo Tianfeng was able to persuade him because he had helped Leng Qianhen forge the Lonely Frost sword. Yi Guchen knew that it was almost impossible for him to rope in Leng Qianhen. However, Yi Guchen was not discouraged and kept this matter in mind. Just as Yi Guchen was about to leave, Ling Maoyin stopped him. By the way, there's another piece of news recently. Maybe you should know about it. Do you remember the map fragment we got in the ancient Chaos Wasteland? I heard that it's related to the legendary ancient ruins Holy Dynasty. The Sword Dynasty has sent people to communicate with the War God Dynasty and other forces. They might be able to find the location of the ancient ruins Holy Dynasty's treasure. Rumor has it that there might be a fruit of the Holy Path in the ancient ruins Holy Dynasty's treasure, Ling Maoyin said. Fruit of the Holy Path. Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows slightly. Su Qingyu's voice rang in his mind. The so-called fruit of the Holy Path is the fruit of laws left behind by a saint. To some extent, it's the same as the enlightenment of the Holy Path law. I see. I didn't expect there to be such a thing in the ancient ruins Holy Dynasty's treasure. Yi Guchen sighed inwardly. There was no doubt that the fruit of the Holy Path was precious, especially for a fake saint expert. Wait. Fruit of the Holy Path. Leng Qianhen. Yi Guchen's eyes lit up. Chapter 986. There was no doubt that the Saint Tao fruit was extremely attractive to false saint experts. It would be a good choice if he could use this opportunity to win over Leng Qianhen. Moreover, given Leng Qianhen's character, if Yi Guchen really helped Leng Qianhen break through to become a saint, Leng Qianhen would definitely return the favor. However, this was just Yi Guchen's imagination. Firstly, it was still unknown whether there was a Saint Tao fruit in the ruined Sky Holy Dynasty's legacy. Secondly, even if the legacy was opened, if there was no formation to block experts, it would be almost impossible for Yi Guchen to seize the Saint Tao fruit. However, no matter what, Yi Guchen would not let go of a chance as long as there was a chance. After that, Yi Guchen made some preparations and quietly left Sacred Cliff College, heading to the Sword Catacomb. When he left the college, Yi Guchen did not alert anyone and left alone. He even put on a cloak and a hood to cover his face. It was not that Yi Guchen deliberately wanted to hide. It was just that he really did not want to be surrounded like a rare animal. In particular, the disturbance at Mount Saint Crossing had not yet subsided. If Yi Guchen went to the Sword Catacomb openly, he would probably attract a large group of people to follow him. Moreover, Yi Guchen also wanted to use the sword principle that he had comprehended in the Sword Catacomb as a trump card. If he exposed himself in advance, it would alert Hua Wuxia and other opponents, which would not do Yi Guchen any good. Therefore, after careful consideration, Yi Guchen chose to hide his identity and leave alone. The Sword Catacomb was located at the Heavenly Sword Mountain, one of the 360 mountain ranges of the Sword Dynasty. It was not particularly far from the Divine Cliff Mountain range. After riding a flying beast, Yi Guchen spent 3 days and finally arrived at the Heavenly Sword Mountain range. After another half a day, Yi Guchen sat cross-legged on the flying beast and looked into the distance. A city came into view. We've arrived at Sword Leaning City, Yi Guchen murmured. As one of the 4 great secret realms of the Sword Dynasty, the Sword Catacomb's popularity went without saying. As time passed, a bustling city was formed beside the Sword Tomb. It was Sword Leaning City. Yi Guchen planned to rest in Sword Leaning City for a day and adjust his condition. At the same time, he would also inquire about the details of the Sword Tomb. 10 li away from the Sword Leaning City, Yi Guchen descended from his flying beast and entered the city. It was just as Yi Guchen had expected. Even in Sword Leaning City, The many sword practitioners who came and went were mostly talking about him passing the 20th level of Mount Saint crossing. One could imagine what would happen if even one person knew Yi Guqin's identity. In less than half an hour, the entire sword-leaning city would know that Yi Guqin had come to the sword tomb. When the time came for Yi Guqin to challenge the sword catacomb, he would also attract countless spectators. It would be impossible for him to use the lightning sword principle as a hidden trump card. Then, Yi Guqin found a restaurant. As he drank, he inquired about the sword catacomb. TSK, as expected of a sword sun prodigy. That Jian Shisan actually went 70,000 feet into the sword catacomb, and is still cultivating there. Some exclamations came from the table beside him. Yi Guqin's eyes narrowed. He had heard of Jian Shisan's name from Kempo before. Although Jian Shisan was ranked last among the 13 sword sons, he was very powerful. He was the strongest among the sword sons in the independent cultivator camp. Kempo had once said that if Yi Guqin had not appeared, then the one who had the highest chance of becoming Jian Kuei would have been Jian Shisan. Yi Guqin did not expect that Jian Shisan was actually cultivating in the sword catacomb. There's no need to talk about Sword 13. That Yin family's Ju is really amazing. He's already 6,000 meters in. Suki Miyazaki from Tianxian College also broke through 50,000 feet. I think she can break through 60,000 feet this time. Unfortunately, they can't break Jian Jinghong's record of 80,000 feet. Jian Jinghong has the creation-level sword intent. He is like a fish in water in the sword catacomb. He has an advantage over the other prodigies. Yi Guqin thought to himself as he listened to the information around him. The entire sword catacomb was 10,000 feet deep. The deeper one went, the thicker the sword-based Taoist rhymes. At the same time, the pressure of the sword qi would also be stronger. Apart from the results of the supremacies and the pseudo-sanctuary powerhouses. Among the younger generation, Jian Jinghong was the one who set the record. Because he had the creation-level sword intent, he had a great advantage in the sword catacomb and set the record of 80,000 feet. So far, no one among the younger generation had been able to break it. Hey, if Dugu Wubai came to the sword catacomb, how deep do you think he could go? It's hard to say. After all, Mount Saint crossing is very different from the sword catacomb. I don't think so. After all, he is a natural-born saint with extraordinary talent. If he came to the sword catacomb, he might not be able to break Jian Jinghong's record, but he would at least be able to go 60,000 feet deep. The people around him began to chat. Seeing that the people around him were talking about him again, Yi Guqin smiled bitterly under the hood. At this moment, a cold female voice rang out. Dugu Wubai is just a silver spearhead. Even if he came to the sword catacomb, he might not even be able to beat Brother Inju, let alone break Jian Jinghong's record. Hearing this, the entire inn fell silent. Two figures, a man and a woman, slowly walked in. It was the woman who spoke. She was beautiful, but at this moment, she looked unhappy. Cousin is right. Dugu Wubai is just a false name. When the 5 Academies competition comes, his disguise will be exposed, the other man said lightly. It's Yin Lin and Yin Su. Looking at the man and woman, some people whispered. Yin Lin and Yin Su both came from the Yin family, one of the 5 pseudo-saint families. They were from the same family as Yin Wufeng. Yin Ju was the strongest genius of the Yin family, ranked 6th on the sword list. Recently, he had also set a record of 60,000 feet deep in the sword catacomb. Hearing these two people's words, the surrounding people were quiet and no one refuted. As a pseudo-saint family, the Yin family was still very famous in the sword dynasty. No one was willing to provoke the Yin family for no reason. Seeing that no one refuted, Yin Lin and Yin Su spoke one after another, criticizing Yi Guqin. Their words were extremely harsh. In the dark, Yi Guqin shook his head slightly. His position was destined to be on the opposite side of the 5 pseudo-saint families. It was normal for the Yin family to smear him like this. When the 5 Academies competition came, all the smears and rumors would naturally fall apart. Yi Guqin did not stand up to refute. Just when he was about to leave, in a corner of the restaurant, a delicate shout suddenly rang out. Bullshit. As soon as these words were shouted out, Yin Lin and Yin Su stopped speaking, and then their gazes suddenly focused. Someone dared to refute their words? All the eyes in the inn were also fixed on that corner. A purple-clothed young girl with a pretty face was staring coldly at Yin Lin, and Yin Su with a sullen expression. On her small and full chest, there was a silver badge. She is a silver emblem disciple of Sacred Cliff College. Many martial artists in the restaurant looked like they were waiting to watch a good show. Now, it was interesting. Chapter 987. As a loose cultivator faction, Sacred Cliff College's relationship with the pseudo-saint families was obvious. Upon seeing this, Yin Lin said coldly, "What's wrong, Zimo? Did I say something wrong?" The purple-clothed girl named Zimo sneered and said, "You're not just wrong. You're just spewing nonsense. Senior Duga's reputation isn't something you can smear." Today, Yi Guchen was the backbone and revered figure of all Sacred Cliff College's disciples. Although Zimo had been cultivating in the Sword Tomb recently and hadn't returned to the college, she hadn't seen Yi Guchen with her own eyes. However, this didn't hinder her respect for Yi Guchen. Naturally, Zimo couldn't stand Yin Lin and Yin Su slandering Yi Guchen like this. Oh, that Duga Wubai's image disappeared when he was breaking through the last level. Who knows if he cheated or not? Moreover, Duga Wubai's highest battle record was against Ouyang Fengyan. Yin Su said coldly. That's right. Ouyang Fengyan is only 9th on the sword ranking. No one knows Duga Wubai's true battle strength. Maybe big brother Yin Ju can crush him, Yin Lin said with a sneer. You're gauging the heart of a gentleman with your own mean measure. If you have the guts, let your Yin family's Yin Ju cheat, and see if he can break through the 20th level. Zimo retorted strongly. These words made Yin Lin and Yin Su feel stifled in their chests, their expressions unnatural. If Yi Guchen's battle strength was unknown, some people would agree. However, if Yi Guchen cheated, even the warriors present couldn't help but roll their eyes. If it was so easy to cheat on Mount Saint Crossing, there would have been someone who could pass the 20th level long ago. So what? If you have the ability, get Duga Wubai to challenge the Sword Catacomb. Can he compare to big brother Yin Ju? Yin Lin changed the topic. I believe that if senior brother Dugu were to come, he would definitely surpass Yin Ju and even break Jian Jinghong's record. Zimo vowed. As soon as he said this, not to mention Yin Lin and Yin Su, even the surrounding warriors shook their heads slightly. If it was said that Yi Guchen could reach a depth of 60,000 feet, then perhaps some people would agree. But to say that he could break Jian Jinghong's record was a bit ridiculous. The reason why Jian Jinghong was able to set a record for the younger generation was because he possessed a creation-level sword will. Without the sword will of creation, Jian Jinghong would not have been able to penetrate 80,000 feet. What a joke. Aren't you afraid that your bragging will be exposed? I'm afraid that even if Dugu Wubai himself were here, he wouldn't dare to say such arrogant words. Yin Lin sneered. You're courting death. Zimo saw the playful ridicule on Yin Lin's face and couldn't help but be angry. She was also a girl with a rather fiery personality. She immediately drew her sword and stabbed at Yin Lin. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Yin Lin also scolded coldly and stabbed with her sword. The two girls instantly started fighting. Sword shadows flew everywhere, and sparks flew. Zimo and Yin Lin were both at stage 9 of the spirit bridge of heaven and earth. But as time passed, Yin Lin was obviously at a disadvantage. Duckweed sword technique. Zimo's sword momentum changed. She consecutively struck out dozens of times. The sword flowers were beautiful, and the sword moves were erratic like duckweed in the water. Yin Lin's pressure increased greatly and she immediately retreated. And at this moment, Yin Su's eyes narrowed slightly and he suddenly attacked. He flipped his hand and stabbed at Zimo's waist. Yin Su couldn't directly kill a silver emblem disciple of Sacred Cliff College in public. He couldn't bear the consequences of that. But if it was just a serious injury, it wouldn't matter too much. Oh no. Zimo's pretty face changed. She didn't expect Yin Su to be so shameless. At the crucial moment, he ambushed her from all sides. Yin Su's timing was just right. It was the moment when Zimo's sword was unsheathed and unable to be withdrawn. Zimo couldn't block Insu's sudden attack at all. So shameless. Some of the surrounding warriors cursed in their hearts. But this was a conflict between Sacred Cliff College and the Yin family. Ordinary warriors didn't want to get involved. Sister Zimo, it's good to suffer a little. Otherwise, you'll offend people with your words in the future. Yin Lin saw the situation, and a mocking smile appeared on her face. The cold blade was about to land on Zimo's waist. Zimo clenched her teeth slightly. However, in that split second, something happened. There was an ear-piercing sound of wind breaking, followed by a clang of collision. The sword in Insu's hand was actually blasted out of his hand, and he took a few steps back in succession. What's going on? This sudden scene was out of everyone's expectations. At the same time, Zimo's sword move also sent Yin Lin flying. She coughed up blood at the corner of her mouth. Damn it! Yin Lin's face was cold. She was extremely uncomfortable. Everyone looked over and saw a chopstick stuck into the wall on the other side. Hiss! Many warriors sucked in a breath of air. The thing that sent Insu's sword flying was actually a chopstick. And it was a wooden chopstick. Insu was also slightly stunned. No matter what, he was still a stage 9 expert. He shouldn't be so weak. In an instant, everyone in the restaurant looked at the source of the flying chopstick. They saw a hooded cloaked person by the window on the other side. He was leisurely drinking wine. In one hand, he was twirling a chopstick. The person who attacked was Yi Guchen. I can't detect his aura. Insu and Yin Lin both looked serious. If Yi Guchen wanted to hide his aura, they wouldn't be able to detect it. On the other side, Zimo looked at Yi Guchen in surprise. She didn't expect a stranger to help her. May I know your name? Insu frowned and asked. Nobody. Yi Guchen slightly lowered his voice. Good, we will remember today's matter. Insu looked deeply at Yi Guchen and turned to leave. Yin Lin's face was a little ugly. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. She had suffered a lot under Zimo's hands. Wait. Yin Lin looked bitterly at Zimo and Yi Guchen and also left. The whole restaurant was noisy again. But most people's eyes were still fixed on Yi Guchen. To be able to use a chopstick to defeat a stage 9 spirit bridge expert. Everyone knew that this cloaked person was not simple. Under the hood, Yi Guchen frowned slightly and got up to leave. At this time, Zimo blocked in front of Yi Guchen. My name is Zimo, a silver emblem disciple of Sacred Cliff College. Thank you for your help. Zimo stretched out her hand. She was very frank and generous. Yi Guchen shook her hand and didn't say his name. Zimo saw this and didn't ask. Instead, she said, Are you also going to the Sword Catacomb? I do want to take a look at the Sword Catacomb. Yi Guchen said lightly. That's good. Tomorrow, a few of us Sacred Cliff College disciples will go together. If you don't mind, you can go together. And in the Sword Catacomb, the pressure of the sword is slightly different on different paths. If you follow us, you can choose the path with less pressure, and it will be easier to go deeper. Zimo smiled lightly. She was repaying Yi Guchen for his help. There is such a difference? Yi Guchen hadn't heard of it. Yes, and there are some difficult to enter forbidden areas in the Sword Catacomb. We will also tell you. In short, if you follow us, I guarantee that you can go more than 3,000 feet into the Sword Catacomb. Zimo patted her chest and said confidently, the deeper one went into the Sword Catacomb, the better the effect of cultivation. Ordinary rogue cultivators could go no deeper than 2,000 feet. Zimo also mistakenly thought that Yi Guchen was a rogue cultivator. And 3,000 feet was already Zimo's best result. 3,000 feet? Yi Guchen smiled and didn't say anything. His goal was more than 3,000 feet. Chapter 988. After that, Zimo brought Yi Guchen to a manor in Sword Leaning City. This manor was where the disciples of Sacred Cliff College stayed. As soon as Zimo entered the manor, a few figures came up to her. Little junior sister is here. Are you alright? I heard that you had a conflict with the Yin family again. These people were all disciples of Sacred Cliff College. It was obvious that Zimo was very popular among them. I'm fine. I even taught that bitch Yin Lin a lesson. Zimo said with a smile. She was in a good mood. Is that so? It's good that you're not injured. This is... The leader of the group, a man in green, looked at Yi Guchen with some hesitation. That Insu was extremely shameless. He wanted to sneak up on me. It was this gentleman who helped me, Zimo said. Oh, is that so? Thank you for helping Zimo. I'm Qin Lang, a silver emblem disciple of Sacred Cliff College. The man named Qin Lang cupped his hands. Yi Guchen nodded slightly. Seeing that, Qin Lang frowned slightly. The person in front of him was so arrogant that he didn't even tell him his name. On the side, Zimo saw this and quickly tried to smooth things over. You don't know how powerful this young lord is. With just a wooden chopstick, he was able to repel Insu's sword force. Zimo was enraptured when she said this. She was very interested in Yi Guchen's cool moves. Qin Lang's eyes flashed with a strange light when he saw Zimo's beautiful eyes. Tomorrow, we will enter the sword catacomb again. Since this gentleman has helped me, I will naturally help you tomorrow. We will go at least 3,000 feet into the sword catacomb. Qin Lang said calmly as he hid the strange light in his eyes. However, there was a hint of arrogance in his words. Being able to penetrate 3,000 feet into the sword tomb was already a pretty good result. Oh, you can even help others enter the sword catacomb? Yi Guchen asked. Heh. It seems like this is the first time you've come to the sword catacomb, so you're not clear about the situation. In fact, if there's a sword expert leading the way, it can reduce some of the sword pressure. However, according to the strength of those who enter, the pressure will also be different. Therefore, we can't follow the venerables or even the false saints. However, if there is a prodigy leading the way, we can achieve good results, Qin Lang explained. To put it simply, the older generation experts were unable to lead the younger generation disciples in. However, if a genius like Jian Jinghong took the lead, he would be able to help the other disciples to a great extent. Qin Lang knew that he was the most qualified person to lead everyone into the sword tomb. Previously, a small part of the reason why Zimo was able to penetrate 3,000 feet into the sword catacomb was because Qin Lang was leading the way. Yes, with senior brother Qin Lang leading the way, we can definitely help you to penetrate 3,000 feet into the sword catacomb tomorrow, Zimo also said to Yi Guchen with a smile. Yi Guchen nodded slightly and didn't say anything. He couldn't refuse their good intentions. Although Yi Guchen didn't need it at all. Then, everyone began to adjust their breathing and prepare for entering the sword catacomb tomorrow. However, Zimo, the girl, circled around Yi Guchen like a sparrow, and asked Yi Guchen curiously about the technique he used. Yi Guchen was also a little speechless. On the other side, Qin Lang looked at this scene expressionlessly. Late at night, Yi Guchen was adjusting his breathing alone in the wing room. A figure in green pushed the door and entered. It was Qin Lang. What's the matter? Yi Guchen said indifferently. I'll get straight to the point. Junior apprentice Sister Zimo is my Dao companion. Regardless of whether this brother is helping me out of righteousness or has other motives, it's impossible for you two to be together. Junior Sister Zimo is a silver emblem disciple of Sacred Cliff College. It's only a matter of time before she becomes a gold emblem disciple in the future. You're just a rogue cultivator, so I hope you can recognize yourself. After the sword catacomb, please leave quietly, Qin Lang said indifferently. He restrained himself and didn't do anything else. Nor did he say anything too harsh. He just instinctively showed his vigilance and resistance when he saw his sweetheart being attracted to another man. Oh, you worry too much. I don't have any thoughts, Yi Guchen said indifferently. That's for the best. I'll help you enter the sword catacomb tomorrow, as long as you don't fall behind. Qin Lang's expression softened slightly, and he turned to leave. Yi Guchen shook his head slightly, and continued to adjust his breathing. If Qin Lang did anything excessive, Yi Guchen wouldn't let him go. But fortunately, he restrained himself and didn't get into a physical fight. The night was quiet. The next morning, Yi Guchen was still adjusting his breathing when a beautiful figure in purple pushed the door open and rushed in. Young master, let's go, Zimo said in high spirits. Every time they entered the sword catacomb, they would gain something and gain enlightenment. And because of the great pressure in the sword catacomb, except for those sword Dao prodigies, The rest couldn't stay in it for too long. That was why they frequently came in and out. Yi Guchen nodded slightly and followed Zimo out. In the manor, the Sacred Cliff College team led by Qin Lang had already gathered. There were more than 20 people. Among them, Qin Lang's cultivation was the highest, not far from the divine dwelling stage. Zimo was second. "Let's go," Qin Lang said expressionlessly when he saw Zimo arrive with Yi Guchen. The group left Sword Leaning City and headed to the Sword Catacomb. The Sword Catacomb was only 100 miles away from Sword Leaning City. Soon, Yi Guchen saw one of the 4 great secret realms of the Sword Dynasty, the Sword Catacomb. The entire Sword Catacomb was a winding and undulating hill. From the outside to the inside, it was a total of 10,000 feet. At a glance, the entire hill was filled with countless ancient swords. Those ancient swords were either mottled with rust, glistening with a cold light, or stained with blood. Endless sword qi filled the Sword Catacomb. Even from a distance, one could feel the mysterious Dao aura spreading out. Of course, it was accompanied by the pressure of sword qi. At this moment, there were numerous figures at the edge of the Sword Catacomb. They were all sword cultivators preparing to enter the Sword Catacomb. It's the people from Sacred Cliff College. It seems that Qin Lang is leading the team again. Last time they went 30,000 feet deep. I wonder if they will make a breakthrough today? Several warriors and sword cultivators revealed curious looks when they saw Qin Lang, Yi Guchen, and the others arrive. As a frequent visitor of the Sword Catacomb, Qin Lang was no longer surprised by the people around him. Qin Lang also enjoyed the feeling of being the center of attention. However, it was at this moment that a cold female voice sounded. "Sister Zimo, enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road." Hearing this voice, the expressions of the Sacred Cliff College team changed. Zimo's almond-shaped eyes widened as she swept her gaze over. A group of people also arrived from another direction. One of them was a young man and a young woman. It was Yin Lin and Yin Su who had a grudge against each other in the restaurant. "It's the people from the Yin family." The surrounding people's gazes also converged on them. When the Yin family and Sacred Cliff College met, there would always be conflicts. At this moment, Yin Lin's beautiful eyes were coldly staring at Zimo. Obviously, she was still angry that Zimo had hurt her before. However, the eyes of the Sacred Cliff College team did not fall on Yin Lin and Yin Su. Their gazes uniformly fell on a man in a blood-red robe behind the Yin family. Inju. Qin Lang and Zimo's expressions turned ugly at this moment. Chapter 989. Each of the 5 pseudo-saint families had their own top prodigies. Although Yin Wufeng was not weak, he was not the strongest prodigy in the Yin family. The strongest prodigy in the Yin family was the man in the blood-red robe in front of them. He was the 6th on the sword list, Inju. As the 6th on the sword list, Inju's strength was unquestionable. He was also undoubtedly a prodigy of the divine dwelling stage. As soon as Inju arrived, Qin Lang's expression changed. Although he was not weak, he obviously could not be compared to the divine dwelling stage prodigy, and the 6th on the sword list. Is that the 6th on the sword list? Yi Guchen glanced at Inju from under his hood. His aura was vigorous, and he was indeed not weak. But he could not make Yi Guchen feel the slightest bit of fear. Inju did not say a word. He just glanced at the people of Sacred Cliff College, and crossed his arms in front of his chest. However, this silence made Qin Lang and the others feel even more pressured, and they were a little breathless. TSK, what's wrong? You don't have anything to say now that Brother Inju is here. Sister Zimo, aren't you very naughty and can't control your mouth? Why don't you say something? Yin Lin smiled proudly with one hand on the corner of her mouth. You. Zimo was so angry that her face turned red, and she gritted her teeth. However, the pressure brought about by Inju was simply too great. Sigh, it's a pity that Sacred Cliff College doesn't have a top prodigy. Yes, if the sword monk Xuanlian or Dugu Wubai were here, the situation might be reversed. Some of the surrounding warriors shook their heads slightly when they saw this scene. Seeing Zimo being humiliated, Qin Lang was also very angry, but he also felt helpless. He was a Silver Emblem disciple, and his strength was nothing in front of Inju. If Brother Dugu was here, you wouldn't be so presumptuous, Zimo reprimanded. Humph. However, this sentence made Inju's cold eyes flash with a cold light. He took a step forward and snorted coldly. The pressure of a divine dwelling stage expert spread out. Cough. On Sacred Cliff College's side, Qin Lang, Zimo, and the others were forced to step back. However, there was only one person who stood in place, unmoving like a mountain. Inju's eyes narrowed slightly. He never thought that there would actually be someone in the Divine Cliff Academy's team that could withstand his pressure. It's him. Lin and Su's eyes met. Just now, Yi Guchen was behind Qin Lang and the others, so Lin and the others did not notice. Brother Inju, he's the one who attacked. Lin pointed at Yi Guchen with a sinister look in her eyes. If Yi Guchen had not stopped him, Zimo would have been the one injured, not him. This person. Inju's eyes narrowed. He felt that he could not see through this cloaked person. Young master. Zimo's pretty face was also slightly shocked. She did not expect Yi Guchen to be able to resist Inju's divine dwelling stage pressure. Qin Lang was also shocked. There was a look of surprise in his eyes. How dare you meddle in my family's business? Inju's body was surrounded by true qi. Seeing Inju's actions, a large group of people gathered around were secretly shocked. Could it be that Inju was going to make a move against the Godcliff Academy? Sigh. Yi Guchen secretly sighed. Although he did not want to expose his identity, he could not watch Sacred Cliff College be humiliated. Just when Yi Guchen was about to attack, a clear and cold voice was heard. Stop it, Inju. The Sword Catacomb is a place for enlightenment, not a place for fighting. If you want to fight, wait until the 5 Academies competition. In the distance, a group of beautiful women slowly walked over. The leader was a woman in a palace dress. She had a curvaceous figure and fair skin. Her light blonde hair added a sense of nobility to her. She was Suki Miyazaki from Tianxian College. Tianxian College is here. It seems that Inju can't do anything, some warriors said. Tianxian College was also on the side of independent cultivators, because of Wu Hongyan. Suki Miyazaki was ranked 8th on the sword ranking. Although she was slightly weaker than Inju, there was not a big gap between them. If Suki Miyazaki intervened, Inju would not be able to deal with Sacred Cliff College. For Suki Miyazaki's sake, I'll let you go for now. Inju was very straightforward. Qin Lang, Zimo, and the others sighed in relief. Yi Guchen did not care. It was best if he did not have to do anything. At this moment, Inju spoke again. Although I can let you go, this path belongs to the family. Inju pointed to a path inside the Sword Catacomb. There were many paths from the outside to the inside of the Sword Catacomb. Some paths did have slightly weaker sword aura. Although it was not obvious, it could last longer if the sword aura was slightly weaker. That path belongs to Sacred Cliff College. Zimo clenched her fists so tightly that her knuckles turned white. That path had slightly weaker sword aura. The surroundings had always belonged to Sacred Cliff College. But now, Inju's words directly wanted to take it for himself. Tisk, even if I give it to you, you can only go 3,000 feet deep. If we follow Brother Inju, we can go at least 4,000 feet deep. Lin sneered. Qin Lang's face turned pale. Lin's words were undoubtedly a humiliation to him, the leader of the team. If you are unhappy, you can attack. But even if Suki Miyazaki blocks me, I can still make you pay the price. Inju said coldly. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki frowned slightly but did not say anything. She had already helped Sacred Cliff College block Inju's attack. She had already done her best. Suki Miyazaki did not want to fight with Inju. It would affect her performance in the Sword Catacomb. Therefore, Sacred Cliff College had no choice but to suffer some losses. We choose another path. Qin Lang's chest rose and fell violently. His face was red from holding back his humiliation. Brother Qin Lang. The surrounding Divine Cliff College disciples were so angry that they felt as if their organs were burning. As for Zimo, her eyes were slightly red. As a girl, she could not bear such humiliation. But even if she could not bear it, she had to. Let's go in, Inju said calmly. He directly stepped onto the path of Sacred Cliff College. Looks like you won't even be able to go 2,000 feet deep today, Inlin said sarcastically. Zemo's shoulders trembled slightly when she heard that. If there are no top prodigies around, you'd better not clash with the In family, Suki Miyazaki said calmly. She also led the Tianxian College team, and chose another path to enter. Let's go in too. Qin Lang exhaled deeply and waved his hand. However, his words did not elicit any response. The entire Divine Cliff College team withered like a frosted eggplant. Zemo's eyes were red. She looked directly at Qin Lang and said, Brother Qin Lang, Zemo would rather fight with the In family than suffer such humiliation. Sister Zemo, the situation is beyond our control. Qin Lang was also a little embarrassed. Obviously, his image in Zemo's heart had been greatly reduced. There was probably only one person in the entire Divine Cliff College team who was still calm. Let's choose a path to enter. Maybe we can surpass the In family. An indifferent voice rang out. It was Yi Guchen who had spoken. He did not care which path they chose. To him, any path was the same. There was no difference. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.